Should we start?
Yeah.
Plugged in? Okay, welcome to the Best Practices meeting for November 12th, 2008. We've got Michael Bardsley coming in late and Jim Palermo will not be here today. So I just wanted to go over the agenda.
Do you want to introduce who's present officially at that meeting?
You all can introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Go for it, Bob.
Oh, I'm Bob Reckman, City Councilor from Ward 3.
David Narkwood, City Councilor from Ward 4.
Alex Giesland.
Lisa DiPiano.
Wendy Foxman, Leeds resident.
Oh, me? Jesus Levno, Florence resident.
And Adam Cohen is video recording today.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, so we've got assigning roles, especially timekeeper I can see as being a really important role for this meeting, and approval of the minutes from the last meeting, report from the report committee, and I have 15 minutes on how to decide our process for the recommendations, how we're going to accept them or not accept them, and then 45 minutes to each go around and suggest a recommendation, one recommendation, and where it came from and why you think it's important. And so Jesus and Alex and I met to go over the agenda. We thought that we would just keep doing this until most of the recommendations are out on the table. And then after that, combining the recommendations, and we think that there's a lot of recommendations that are very similar, so trying to match up recommendations that may be in the same category or part of the same thing. And then after that, take a 10-minute break and come back and decide on which ones are priority, which ones most of us agree on, all of us agree on, some of us agree on, no one agrees on, and then break out into smaller groups to flush out some of the details of each recommendation, and then come back together, and at that point I feel like we can decide what needs to be next. If we want to finalize the recommendations or assign people recommendations to take home and flush out, and then go on to our next steps for 15 minutes.
I think I just think that we're not such a big group, and we won't need to divide our activities as frequently as you suggest in that agenda.
Divide into the small groups after the...
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, you and I talked on the phone, and I think that we have a couple of things I want to do before we do the actual recommendation. I want to talk about the PR stuff we did, that we talked about in our last meeting. I want to approve Wendy's press release because it's got to go out.
Oh, it's already gone out.
And I want to talk about Lisa and I are going to talk to the papers tomorrow. So I prepared something, emailed it to everyone. I want to get that approved or modified as we need to. And I think we can do all this relatively quickly, but we should do that before we figure out how to make our recommendations.
Okay.
I think we also have to address the question then about what Jim's absence means.
For this meeting?
Yeah.
Jim's absence means?
Yes.
In terms of
How
slowing
do
down
we
the-
somehow include him in what our recommendations are?
Right.
It would be one way to frame it. To have some way for him to give us real input, because we really did unfairly, we now recognize, schedule this meeting on a night when I think we knew from our previous meeting that he was not free. So we just had to figure out a way that we could give him an opportunity for
Okay, we can
feedback.
talk about that maybe when we get back together as a large group or during next steps. Jim's absence. Bob, how long do you think for the PR report and all of that? 10 minutes?
10 minutes would be plenty.
Okay, any other additions?
Just, I'm not so certain about that proposal, but my feeling is we should proceed with the agenda and go as far as we can get. And if we're on, which I think the heart of the matter of what we're doing is getting out our recommendations based on all the collective data and info feedback we've had, that If we need more time, we'll check in about that and go through more time, but that is what
So
we.
you'd rather do the recommendations first?
I would like to move forward with
Okay.
that, yeah, and maybe make sure we reserve time to go through that, just because at our last meeting, that's what we said we
Right.
wanted to do.
Okay.
But I don't disagree that it's mostly that I wanna make sure that we give it the ample time
Yeah.
that we said we would.
So there's 15 minutes at the end here, and maybe 10 of those minutes could be this PR report.
I think
Because it
we
is
should-
next steps, so it
Yeah.
could be, what are we gonna do for
Well,
them?
so let's hear from the other two members and we can decide what to do.
Well, this is a little off mark, but I think that the total task, if we can come close, I don't think that we need the finished writing. If we have that we can do that over
Yeah,
the next week.
that's
at
right, we
home.
don't need complete language on any of them.
Never would I have imagined that.
Well, as long as we come to consensus about what they
Right.
need.
That's right, that's right.
Or try to.
Yeah.
We may not.
Well, there's consensus on what they need, I think. But not consensus
Right.
necessarily on whether we want to
Exactly,
recommend.
a shared understanding of it.
Yes.
So right now, we're just trying to decide where to put the PR report and all that other stuff.
I guess I'd vote to get it over.
Okay, I'll vote to get it.
Well, we've already spent 7 minutes trying to decide whether to do it or not, so.
I'm fine either way. There
Right.
won't be much, you know, if we don't get the recommendations.
Yes.
But there won't be much to be done, so.
Just going over the agenda.
Can I just make one comment? My only concern about talking about it now and making any decisions about it is seeing how far we get in the meeting, and it may change what we decide to do around the PR.
Okay.
So I wanna make sure we get through it, I'm honoring your
Okay.
request for that,
Right.
but it
Okay.
may be influenced somewhat by how far we
Okay.
get. I'm optimistic.
And David's neutral,
I'm
so we have a
optimistic.
real conundrum.
It just doesn't.
I've changed my vote.
Fine, we'll do it, we'll do the stuff I wanna do
15
it after we
minutes
do
at
the, okay.
Okay. Alright, so, any other changes for the agenda, comments? Alright, so, meeting roles, who would like to do timekeeper? Somebody,
Have time.
okay, great. And then Bob will take notes, and I'll facilitate, and Wendy, you'll, write up on the
Sure,
board?
please.
Great. Okay. We've got approval of minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Second. Are we still doing that?
All in favor?
Aye.
Yippee. Oh, wait.
Okay, now, so for 15 minutes, David, how to decide on the recommendations?
Starting the timer now.
You wanna do that first?
Yeah.
Alright, let's do that first, it's simple.
I thought this would be 1
Stopping
minute.
the
This is the, I'm sorry, this is the outline for the report,
Okay,
if that's okay. We think it's pretty straightforward. And David and I met and we divvied up some of the writing and some decisions have yet to be made, but that's just a basic outline, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, we basically said
That's
we would
right.
we would wait till the whole thing was
Simple.
done and then do the
Yeah.
executive
Yeah.
session.
Is that all right?
Because I mean, those are the three things that we worked on, outreach and reach and research, so.
and does that essentially mean that we're not gonna see an executive summary until, well, we see it, we're not gonna see it at our next meeting? Because we won't have the language for the recommendations till that meeting. So, it's not a bad thing, but I'm just trying to think, because we don't have any more meetings left.
Maybe there could be a meeting scheduled to
That's
pull
right,
that together.
that's right. Rubber stamp it.
A draft,
The last meeting is the big rubber
a
stamp.
draft semi-quasi,
Well, it can be distributed by email and we can bring our comments to a special meeting.
Okay,
Great, yeah, it looks good. Okay, so now for 15 minutes, how to decide the recommendations. Does anybody have a proposal?
To state the obvious, I think that anything that the six of us can basically agree on is in. We have to figure out a way to let Jim get his 25 cents worth in about our recommendations and hope that he will respond to that, our list soon. But we have to figure out a way to figure him in. I don't know what to do if, for the sake of discussion, 4 of us are in favor of a recommendation and the other 2 are neutral or opposed. That, it doesn't seem to me that we can really put in. I don't know what to do at 5. And in some ways, we know that the difference between unanimity and one dissenter will be the final language that we choose to use. That our general agreement on the importance of X may lose an adherent in the language process. But we have to go forward as though we think we're going to have language we can all agree to. I think that that's all. That's all.
So Michael and then Alex.
Well, since this is a draft proposal that's going to kick off a 90-day discussion period, right? There's another way to look at it, and we could include recommendations that are worded in such a way like consider forming, for example, I noticed that someone has a Citizen Advisory Commission language here. So it could be consider reviewing and revising the Citizen Advisory Committee that's on the book. So we could have things worded like that and then that still is leaving room for input from the public. And after we go around for the public, then we could end up, and hearing from them, then we could end up taking more definitive votes. So what I would suggest is being, a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more in terms of general and using recommendations like consider or and putting things like a study committee or something like that together rather than a hardcore recommendation and then everything that doesn't make whatever the cutoff is, that gets thrown out and then only a handful of recommendations that we are leaving ourselves a very little time to consider as what's there. So there's another way to look at it. I think we can look at this as an educational tool.
Alex?
Part of the problem is the number that we're gonna come up with, the number of recommendations we're gonna make. If we're gonna make one recommendation, it's one thing, we're gonna make 20 recommendations, it's another. I still think that we put all of them, that we just go around and put the recommendations that people feel should be considered. Look at them and see if we can work toward a consensus on some. I'm sure we're going to get 3 or 4 that are going to be a consensus, and at that point, have the discussion. Then rather than sort of an arbitrary, but I think it comes down to a vote. It's got to be 4 or 5 out of 6.
Well, except for the last comment that you just made, I was in agreement with both what you're saying. We did adopt decision-making, a consensus process for decision-making, which is what we could use unless we choose to go by Robert's Rules of
We
Order.
can't come.
But I've had a thought, you did and I did, and maybe other people did as well, spent some time looking through and I highlighted the succinct parts of the recommendations, and so many repeated among us. So I'm not that worried. I also think that, as we've all acknowledged, there's plenty of work more to do. And I think that can be a way that we deal with things that we may just get stuck around talking about and trying to finesse and say, you know what, this demands more study. And many of us have recommended that either there's another group that follows up with this or reactivate the Citizens Advisory, whatever that is. but that it needs further work, but we make a recommendation that it not be dropped, that it's something, you know what I mean? So it keeps us from getting hung up on something particular. So I have confidence that we'll figure out a way to move all these forward in some way, whether we come up with, you know, specific things that the council can do within the next 6 months is really a separate issue. So.
Yeah, I'll say that I'm in favor of throwing it back out to the public, and I think that's a really good practice for us to do, is saying, okay, we all agree unanimously on these 5 items, and we can say, some of us agreed on these, whatever we wanna say, but to spit it back up to the public and have them look at it and say, yeah, you're right on with this, or, you know, and maybe only one of us will like one recommendation, but if we take it back out to the public, we could have a bunch of people that say, no, that's one that we feel strongly about. So, yeah, I'd like to be as inclusive as we can, and then just get it back out to the public, and then winnow it down even more after the 90 days.
Oh, so you foresee in that case possible substantial alterations between the draft report recommendations and the final recommendation?
I'm not sure, but I wanna keep it open for that.
Because it's really who it's going to is the city council first and foremost. I mean, the public is important as well, but
Well, if we did our job right, it shouldn't be substantial.
Right. If we were listening.
But we had challenges, and I hope they'll be, public will, be kind.
I found Alex's written summary, the compilation that he had sent to each of us, very helpful. Do we want to work from that? Everybody got that? That's easier than writing them up on the wall.
I think we need to, for the purposes, I think it would be good to get, not that I want to stand up and write in front of everyone, but I'm willing to do that. But just to all get us on focus at the same time and also get it on camera, I think that would be useful, but can.
Would be useful to.
I mean, I don't envision writing up 500 things. I'm really, Lisa's suggestion, or that came from the working group for this meeting.
Some of them are fairly lengthy.
Right.
I
But
mean,
that was the backup
individual-
information that you put in there. Yeah.
No, those are recommendations off the, each one that's followed by, there's no reduction of those. Those are how they appear on the list that we gave you.
Well, I did something similar to you, but what I did was actually reduce them by highlighting the key language so that it would translate well onto a shared documentation, I'm hoping. I mean, as we go around
I say we just stick to the agenda, cause that's what the working group came up with, and we could have a lengthy discussion right now about how to change it up, but.
Right away.
Are we at the 15 minutes, or?
We have almost a little under 7 minutes.
7 minutes to go. Do we wanna come up with?
How do we want to accommodate Jim? Let's see, we haven't answered that question.
I think whatever work product we produce tonight, he will be circulated to him, and he'll just have to jump back in and come
Right.
to the next meeting.
He did send in his recommendation.
Right.
And there is another meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're posted.
Next Wednesday.
Jesus?
I mean, if maybe someone has Jim's list of recommendations, you know, here, maybe you can open the recommendations with that. I think that's
We do, we all have everybody's lists.
right.
And they were all posted online.
So maybe someone will read that.
And many of his recommendations are incorporated into what I'm sure recommendations are gonna be. But how, but if we wait until if we give him until our next meeting to weigh in, will that make the production of the final report more difficult?
I'm not gonna be at the next meeting, and whatever happens, happens, and I just won't be there.
Right,
I'm gonna have I'm gonna feed into that meeting,
Mhm.
but I will not be at that meeting.
right.
So I take that.
I don't think, the people who are here make the decisions. I
Okay.
mean, he's written several fairly lengthy emails
Mhm.
on not only recommendations, but also how he thinks the process ought to
Yeah,
run.
and he's clearly expressed his ideas usefully, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he would say the same thing if he were here. But then his take on each one might be different. I just don't think that we can incorporate that and continue to try and meet the deadline.
He can also review the video
Yeah.
and he could make notes or make comments to what he sees on the video. So that's another option. Sorry, Jim.
So any other comments on how we're going to decide?
Well, so Alex said let's pretend he's not here. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't have.
I'm not gonna pretend.
It really isn't.
Right.
Yeah, it seems like he'll have an ample opportunity to get his thoughts in.
Okay.
Before the 19th.
Whatever is agreed on at this meeting, will that be posted on our website?
Whatever.
Is agreed on at this meeting, if we come up with some tentative
I think
recommendations.
it should be in the minutes.
They'll be in the minutes,
Yeah.
which you get posted, so
Yeah.
you'll be able to see it that
Yeah.
way too, so.
Yeah.
We can help.
That's back to life, that's what
Okay, so getting back to the how we're going to decide, people feel comfortable about
We
this
still haven't
moving
agreed about
forward?
Jim, I don't think.
What do we have
Am
to
I
agree?
wrong?
it works. Agreed is on here.
Okay, so, see, and I think Jim represents that if we can, out of courtesy, give him a chance to weigh in, that is what we should do. We don't have to do it, we shouldn't be obligated to do it, but we should do our best attempt to make sure that he has a chance to see what we came up with and to weigh in.
I think we all agree to
Yeah, I think we agree to that, but the mechanism is, what I'm thinking is, he looks at this discussion, whether it's on the video or reads the minutes online, and he will be here at our next meeting. So there is an opportunity, but I don't see how there's an opportunity to make recommendations for changes or disagreement in
Okay.
between meetings. I don't think that's a
Yeah.
good precedent to set. So I think we put it out that this is what we did, and then when he comes in, we can give him some time to say, I agree
Yeah.
or disagree.
And I guess I feel if we really are stuck around that, and I don't think it's a bad idea, maybe it is, and I brought this up at our last meeting, to potentially have minority opinions of the committee.
It documented in the report, saying
Mhm,
this was
mhm.
discussed and there was a 3-3 or whatever. I think that's
Okay.
great.
Does that satisfy the?
It's okay.
Okay, so how do we feel about the deciding, the process of deciding? Are we
Because
going to vote, or are we gonna just put them out there and just see how many of us agree on them and take it from there?
I'd like to stick with the consensus method that we've used the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
and then and just see. I tend to agree with Alex that I think we're gonna find there's a lot of we're gonna get through a lot of these, and there's gonna be a lot of consensus around them. So I don't know. Rather than anticipate problems, I say let's just go
Yeah,
Let's do
through it.
let's
Okay.
cross the bridge when if we actually get to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
I feel confident having done the highlighting of what we have, we do have a lot of agreement, or at least multiple shared recommendations.
Okay,
Minute and 35 to go.
can we move on early?
Yeah.
So we don't
Right.
spend it all.
Okay, we'll add that to the end.
Bank it.
Okay, so now this next part, we've got 45 minutes, and we can each go through and say a recommendation we feel strongly about. And just as part of what Jim was concerned about was that these recommendations just don't come out of thin air, that we state where they came from, if they came from the public forum or something that somebody emailed us, or from InReach or research, say where it came from when you're suggesting that recommendation. So we'll just keep going around until we've got a lot of them up, and Wendy has volunteered to write them up, or at least the main idea of them.
Reflect is in the black.
So who wants to start?
I'll start.
Okay.
So we're basically doing from our list, right? I mean,
From
it's-
your list or
Yes.
someone else's list?
Okay. My one, though not necessarily in that order, is developing some kind of a standard city protocol for conducting public meetings and hearings and forums that can be used uniformly by all boards and committees. And there are plenty of examples in other communities that we looked at in the research that call that out. Including the big ones, the biggies, Portland and Vancouver have pretty extensive public participation manuals that go through all that stuff.
As I write, would people please correct me or change
Yep.
anything? I'm gonna try to be succinct. If you want more, let me know. And I'm gonna put in parentheses if you feel like there'll be enough room to do this, where it came from.
Can I also just say, before I finish, I think it would be useful because I know this was a concern I thought I heard Jim having, was that when we do our recommendations, it might be good to reference, where we heard this at the forum, we saw this in the research, and we also saw this in the InReach. I mean, this was a triple header. I mean, we heard this in the InReach.
That's what I was just talking
Yeah.
about,
So
InReach.
I think we can find references from all three areas for that one.
And I think that appeared on many lists.
Exactly, yeah.
I actually also submitted a meeting review form because I was
Research
concerned
and
about
other
the different
forums.
The-
This would be a little key
The
here.
one thing I'd like to just comment on that is where it said standard meeting hearing forum, is that there may be different protocols for different types of meetings and different size committees. I don't think one
Yeah.
size.
One's not
fits
gonna
all.
fit all, that's
And I
certainly
didn't
true.
mean it should be one size fit all, I
Right.
just meant some kind of a guidebook, yeah.
So-
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Would that also include the electronic stuff, or is that a separate one, I think? That's the web stuff. I understand your point, and I agree 100%.
I mean, there's a whole protocol just for how a board should, conduct itself. Looking at the self-review forms we got, there's not a uniformity of practices on the board, so, but that could be a whole separate, recommendation in and of itself. That, the boards all post things on their website the same way, and all, have the member names and contacts and expiration date of their terms, and so there's a whole thing about that as well. I don't know if that fits into this.
That's another, we can have it, we're gonna need some recommendations, that's a good, have a
So
separate
that's,
one.
yeah, and that comes up in other people's stuff.
That's right.
Did I not catch something? I'm really trying to abbreviate it. If we need to go further, I'm gonna put IR&O for InReach, research, and outreach, which would include all the outreach things. If you feel like we need to go into more detail, I might not capture it up here just because I'm afraid we'll have too much here, but hopefully we'll fill it in. That's okay. You did some of that.
Who wants to go next? We could just go around, or
Or
Michael?
David can keep going.
No, we're supposed to go around.
Okay, well, I put two together, I guess. It's David's build a more formal public education input component into the city's annual budget process. And my own recommendation that all budget financial documents, all budget/financial documents generated by the city should be easily accessible. Should include salaries, department budget requests, monthly budget updates, actual money spent as a percentage of budget, external and internal audit reports, and I think that the council's finance committee, including the mayor and the chief financial officer, should be responsible for public education and outreach
On the budget.
What, can you check what I've written?
David's is a little more general. And we heard that certainly at the public forum in a number of places, and also we've heard variations of that
I heard it in
online.
InReach, and it was in research. It was in all these places, if I recall. InReach, outreach, and in research. Is this, okay?
Okay,
Although I would say, when Alex was talking about my number 5, I would just say I was trying to make it more sort of like part of, like a requirement of the process, you know what I mean? That there would be, I don't know. That we could build,
Requirement of the budget process.
yeah, because that now we kind of do it by tradition, but there's not really like, well, we have a July 1st deadline, but everything in between is sort of, there's not really, like, there's not a date that the budget has to be out, there's not a date, and I know we're beholden to the state sometimes to try to get those numbers, but if there was some more regularity for people, they could know about how that process works.
Within each of those larger goals, there are several other things that we could think about to break out as a way to accomplish that. So that's one of them. I think there's other ways, like having information on the website. There have been in the past, for example, calls for a citizens budget advisory committee that would work in relationship with the city council things. So there's a number of different suggestions, I think, like that would try to go to the same goal.
Okay, would I also like a specific list of documents publicly
Right.
that should be available?
And what I like that you mentioned is that there's a point person who's accountable for that.
Mhm.
Something that would make it happen. That's what I heard you say.
Yeah, chief financial officer,
Yeah.
obviously, and I would think the mayor.
I would say, I don't know if this is, I think that this could go under that last recommendation, but not only just the budget, but just overall city functions, like I think that's, we could use the mayor does the budget roadshow, and there's a lot of different methods of getting out, what's happening in City Hall out to the public, so I would say expanding public education, not just on the budget, but for all of the different processes, what each department does, what decisions they make.
City school or something different?
I mean, not specifically, city schools could be one way to do it. So I called it expand forms of city public communication, neighborhood coalitions, blogger networks, going door to door, online calendars, public bulletin boards, local radio stations, NCTV. So just to really look at how does communication happen from the city to the public or from the public to the city, and think creatively about how to really
I
build
had
on
one
that.
like that called public outreach and education.
Yeah.
And certainly city school could be an example of
Mhm.
that, but there's no further example.
So Alex, could you just summarize for me your basic proposal?
That David thought that there be an public educational component of the budget process.
Okay.
And the second part of that is that all of the financial documents generated by the city that are available to the public should be easily accessible. That are available under the law should be available.
I guess what I mean, just to flesh it out, like right now, the public hearing that we really have on the budget are the 2 votes that the city council take. I mean, that's really the public hearing that happens. And so I would think you would have like a informational forum on the budget prior to that. I mean, the council tries to have budget hearings and calls in individual counselors. No one usually comes, they're televised, but I just mean sort of formalizing that so that there's more input at the beginning before we get to that final vote.
Was it the city of Lawrence? Somebody identified one city had.
Yeah.
Yeah, although,
Was that the model?
and that's in there, but Lawrence is it was a little bit of a different situation. They were really starting from just zero knowledge of the budget, and there was nothing, there was no, so they
So
were
it's a
trying to.
municipal finance primer and all of that.
It was so if you look at their People's Guide to the Budget, it's basically like the mayor's roadshow, kind of a PowerPoint,
Mhm.
how Proposition 2.5 worked, et cetera, and then breaking down the budget into, its various parts, so along the same lines, exactly.
Right, but more specific each fiscal year to the current fiscal realities of
Well,
the
they did
city.
it one year, and I don't know that they I think the city adopted that model for how it published its budget book, which is a lot like ours, where it has pie charts and it talks about all the various, how things are broken down, so it's a little bit different, but.
And I'm wondering at this point if we could just keep going around and save like the deeper discussion for when we get into
But
each one.
I do think
I
it's
think it's
helpful when
to
people
clarify it, yeah.
piggyback with their
Right.
similar ideas, because we're marrying ideas.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
gonna
doing
put,
the first 2 things.
I'm gonna put
Yeah.
check marks when you start saying, I have that on my list too. Okay, so we can start doing that, okay. Okay.
So Wendy, I think there was just expand forms of city public communication.
What's that?
That would be my recommendation.
I wrote it that way, but.
Good, great, now I have one marker.
Forms or forms? Forms, I think.
Forms, city/public communications. And that was from the forum and InReach and. From those two.
Shall I go?
Sure.
I didn't.
You didn't go yet?
I didn't go yet. No.
Neither did I.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
No, I'll go
right
last,
ahead. You
because
go-
I'm running
no, no.
away, you go ahead.
There's a couple of us over there.
Yeah.
Jim.
Yeah.
Got a channel, Jim.
I mean, certainly one thing the city needs to do is to really improve and spruce up its entire electronic presence. And we touch pieces
Website,
of,
website, or more than website?
now, a great website. Because just like different committees do things by different rules and processes, different committees have completely different patterns about getting the information out, making it available online. If that was also standardized, that would really help, perhaps, would help several things. Would help citizens find out more relatively easily if they have computers. And it would modernize our civil service, would be another argument I would make, that it'll sort of force each of the different boards to do some new things and think in some new ways that I think will be helpful to them. So,
We heard it in InReach and it was in Outreach too.
I think you have to put some dollar signs in there too somewhere. I mean,
Yeah.
that was one of, that we have to talk about it in a budget context. That
Yeah.
You have to, because, if you say we need a great website,
Yeah.
that means you need to have, like, personnel that are devoted to working on the
That's right.
website.
Yeah.
You can't just, because right now it's every department
Yeah.
individually.
One of the
and it
things I
shows.
would like to, if our website be easier for people, is to, finding the city council. A lot of times I hear that
Yep.
accessing the city council page is a little bit tricky. You almost have to know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And it would be great if there was a, one of those automatic email lists where people could be sent the city council
Yeah.
agenda.
yeah.
I mean, that was a suggestion last time, and they only had 3 of those little buttons there, and we were the 4th.
Yeah.
So, I think sending out the city council agenda on a regular basis through email would be a good effort.
Mary has a list, but it's dependent, and she sends it out to the public, but it's dependent on people emailing her and
Right.
saying, I wanna be on the list.
It's not an
It's not like a
automatic sign up.
checkbox, yeah.
So Jesus and Adam,
It's
you
easy
both
enough.
had your hands up.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say a couple of things about the electronic presence and just committees using that stuff. It should be a fairly simple thing for each city board and committee to have one person on that board or committee dedicated to compiling an email list of people who want to be informed of the meeting and then sending out an email letting them know that the meeting is going to happen. I mean, that's something that's really not that hard that could be done without budget. That would be very helpful. And then the other thing is maybe some work around the city calendar. That's on the website, making sure that all
Yeah. You have to include a good calendar.
yeah, I mean the calendar is actually pretty good as it is, but it's missing some of the city meetings, or at least it's missing at least one that I know, which is the ordinance committee meeting. So making sure that all
That's
city
right.
boards and committee meetings are posted on there would be good.
Just to extend what Michael and Jesus said, I think there should be a checklist, email sign up for basically every body that has agendas, minutes, meetings. So if you want to get 20 emails a week, you can. but I think
You can
they
get
should
the
all be
minutes or the
represented.
agendas of any number of,
Every body that
Yeah,
generates
yeah,
such material,
yeah.
yeah.
So,
Gonna put out my suggestion.
okay,
We vote on
Wendy
it.
will go last.
Oh, it's Wendy?
I thought you did yours.
No, I was commenting on everybody else.
Okay, okay.
You wanna go?
Well, I was just wondering if we were gonna comment, or we were gonna just go round and round and round. Does this seem to be working? Okay.
Does it seem to be working?
Because I'm afraid we're gonna just expand too much, and we really wanna get at the succession
Well,
lines,
as
and
we
then.
talk and clarify that, I'm taking ones off my list that I'm not gonna have to, because I'm
Okay,
fairly
and-
certain that it's encompassed in what somebody else said, so. I think it's time saving. So my recommendation is to review and revise the appointment process for city committees. And I think it's, we have a bit of a process there, there's nothing that's really formalized, and I think it's confusing to some people. And I think part of that needs to be sort of include some type of effort to go out and to recruit people in a more democratic and visible, transparent way.
And that came from,
Well, we've heard it in public comment sessions, and we have heard it at the forum.
Definitely, couple.
It's also in the research.
yeah.
There's several models for how
Yeah.
different communities have tried to do that.
I think we have a lot of places for all of these.
Yeah.
Who's gonna be responsible? I had a similar recommendation, making it the city council's responsibility to have more oversight and a more active role. Who do you see fixing changing the appointment process?
Well, the city council certainly has a mechanism to do it. We have an appointments committee, and they could, if we wanted to ask them to take that charge and come back with a proposal, that would make sense. I don't know if we wanted to go that far in our recommendation about the point person. It makes sense if we can agree on it, but that would be one committee that would.
I could see calling out as one of the sub-items to that, have the council examine its practices and like you said, have appointments and evaluations, because I think the council has a lot of authority in the process. I mean, we have the final authority in every appointment, so it's not like we lack authority, it's more how we exercise it. And, so maybe appointments and evaluations, now appointments and evaluations receives the appointments and considers them, maybe they try to take a more active role with the mayor at the front end, saying this is a pool of people you should consider, appointing or something. So there's different ways.
So the charter laid out very specifically that it goes through the mayor, and the mayor submits it to that committee,
No,
or the rules or something.
well, it's it's like sort of like the the president nominates and the Senate confirms. I mean, it's very that basic. It just says the mayor appoints and the council approves, but it doesn't spell out
But
anything in
we
between.
created the
Yeah.
appointments committee, that isn't in the charter.
Yeah.
That's something we could expand their role to be a little bit more aggressive in this matter.
But the origination of the appointment comes from
the mayor.
The mayor.
Right. So that's a structural.
Right.
Uh,
So if we wanna look at the structural thing, but we could have a committee that's going out there and knowing what vacancies are coming up, generating a lot more applications. So the mayor has a larger pool from which to review.
That's what Worcester has in it's in their research. They have actually a committee that advises on appointments and is an outreach body.
Is it a citizen committee or a
It's
subcommittee
citizens,
of the?
it's citizens,
Oh.
yep, that are appointed to advise the mayor on appointments.
Ken, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think we have the appointments committee, and I just think, the way it's been done is the mayor makes the appointments committee looks at the applications and says, fine, apparently they're qualified. But I think you could, probably do better by, sort of having a set of rules that the appointment committee would have to do, perhaps leaving something open for nominations from the public saying, we're gonna have this and, we should, be able to call whoever you know, has some expertise in that and ask if there are any nominations, but, you know, sort of some rules for sort of outreach, so we can have candidates that, you know, we might not get any other way. But I think it's really just establishing a set of rules. As long as you have the appointments committee, as long as they follow the rules, you should be, you know, you could design something where you could feel satisfied that they, you know, got candidates that would be the best, you know, for the committee.
Maybe.
I'm trying to follow in the flow here and pick something off my list that, I don't know if there is one. Does the city council or the city government have a vision or a mission statement? Before I put that in my recommendations, but I'm not sure that I don't wanna suggest that if it's been done and it's been done more than once. Okay, I'm going to put that up. I'll just read what I wrote and then I'll summarize
The
it.
closest thing that I know of that's current is what was in the sustainability
Okay,
mission statement.
which does apply for the city.
You could.
Well, I'll just say this, create a vision mission statement for city government that prioritizes citizen engagement, ethical behavior, and best practices in decision making.
Is that similar, sounds like it's a little bit similar, I know Bob has a recommendation about, doing a resolution.
The council resolution,
Like,
yeah.
Some of the other best
Yeah.
practice communities have done, so maybe it could be part of that, you know, as well, or some of that.
I'll just write resolution / statement. City vision. Citizen engagement. Is there another part of that about citizen engagement, ethical behavior?
No.
I could just write ethics. And best practices.
Yeah.
We're halfway through our 45 minutes, just to give you a time
Okay.
check.
So we can start going around again.
Well, my last thing,
Oh, yeah.
or did you
Did
go
you-
on?
you
All right,
Okay.
I went the first round.
I'll read one of Jim's if you'd like,
Can
or,
I ask a question? Is there, a point for public to insert possible recommendations here, or I don't know, I'm just asking.
Well, have been. Have, you.
Well, we commented on the recommendations that you've all brought forth, I was just wondering if there was any possibility of us inserting one.
Seems to me that we all have heard your suggestions and appreciated them, but the actual language we adopt is gonna have to come from us, from members of the committee.
Well,
Right.
he's talking
What
about
I'm saying is-
a recommendation, I mean, it doesn't mean we're gonna adopt it,
Right.
but I would like to do a couple more rounds and see if there is something that we are, glaringly missing, and I'd be very receptive to your comments. But-
Okay.
Yeah,
That sounds
I
fair.
hope that we go around and you go, gee, they hit the one I was gonna bring up, that's what I'm hoping.
Me too.
Okay, one more time, at least.
David?
okay, should I read one of Jim's, or just to make sure Jim gets, that Jim's out there, or do we wanna, I don't know.
It's up to you.
Why don't you read one of Jim's, but we won't hold it on your.
Okay.
Put it on Jim's.
I'm just trying to figure out which,
If I remember correctly, Jim's were very concise.
and they all
It
kind
was
of,
like a
it's actually, they all
process, like
kind
it
of
was-
flow together,
Yeah.
so, and some of it we've talked about in terms of policies or procedures, let's see. Well, I think number 2 should be, maybe it's part of one of our earlier recommendations, but, there should be some formal procedure for identifying parties who will be directly
Yeah.
affected by a decision.
Right.
So, so somewhere built into our process, part of that should be, okay, basically it says who are the stakeholders. It's a formal requirement that the stakeholders are identified, so that they can, be communicated with. on the project, which is his next recommendation. And providing them information about the project so they can have an opportunity to intelligently engage in the process.
Can I write early on here, because I think I
Yep.
have to call that.
Yep.
Early and often.
So that would be the one I would read for Jim on this round.
Yeah. What's that? Me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think, Michael, you had this one on yours too. So it was reestablish Citizens Advisory Committee comprised of elected members from the public to provide a check and balance for the government.
And it may not be the exact language, but to review.
Right, something about the citizens of, look into what happened to it, update it, get it going again.
Can I just write that? CRC return in some form?
Sure. And that came from members coming to our meetings, from the public forums, from
Came from a lot of
ourselves.
places.
A lot of places. Jesus.
Not from Emory.
Would that be similar
Not
to,
for
would
me.
that be similar or the same as this committee being a permanent one, or is that a different,
I don't know.
suggestion?
It could be different because this committee had a focus
Right.
on best practices where an advisory committee could in fact have a broader charge.
Oh, okay.
I actually brought the ordinance for it that exists, unenforced. Alice?
I would still, I'd kind of like to look at the, Jim's first, each significant city project, this is getting to the idea of getting into the process as early as possible. There are a number of recommendations, and I was trying to synthesize them. But I think that his wording, that each significant city project, new policy, procedure, should be evaluated to determine whether in-depth public involvement is appropriate. That should be sort of the first thing that happens. And if that occurs, you can either use his word or my recommendation, which is where public outreach is mandated in any process, it should begin as soon as possible. Stakeholders must be identified, contacted, encouraged to help craft the decision. Failure to accomplish this should be enough reason to restart the process. It means if you get 2/3 of the way through a project and you discover that you really need public input, you should start all over again.
One of the things we saw when we looked at Portland's public involvement manual, and that this is actually built right into it, that this is part of their process, that they have criteria for how big a project is, what the scope is, how many people it affects, square footage, and then they have triggers for what you have to do. So what you're saying, but maybe it gets incorporated as, again, part of a protocol, not just something out, but something part of an actual protocol, so that that's always happening for every project. So like you're saying, Alex, if that step doesn't happen, then you go back to the beginning. It just should be a required step. But again, not to replace a manhole cover, but for every decision. But they're like
Replace all the manholes.
Portland, yeah, exactly. Portland has a really good sort of, so that's in our research to look at.
Is this caption?
So it said just scratch out Portland.
Yes.
Would you,
Adam?
in a few words,
And throw
Alex,
in some money.
in a few words, can you give me 10 words for your proposal?
How about
I can't see them all. There we go.
Review significance of the policy decision project and assesses, implement public education involvement process.
It's the first thing you do.
Okay.
Every decision that you're gonna make, decide whether you're gonna go after public input, and if you are, then you start right away to do it.
Adam?
And if I could add perhaps an additional fail-safe to that, if a proposal is perceived to be below the line of significance, that somehow there's still a list where it's indicated so that the people have a chance to judge for themselves whether they agree with that. Because I can see this issue coming up with, say, the zero lot line simplification that came before City Council, I think, the last meeting. There might be disagreement on how significant that proposal is. So I think it should be important that nothing can just sort of slip underneath the public's radar screen without the public saying, yes, that's trivial, we don't need to have a big process about it.
Okay, I'm ready to float to public when borderline, how's that? I'm just trying to quickly summarize it somehow, get to a second level where it's not hidden.
Mhm.
I'm gonna go over.
Michael?
My next recommendation would be some type of training program or training booklet for newly elected and appointed officials. I think most frequently right now it's sink or swim. You're appointed and you have to educate yourself. So I think we really should have a generalized checklist of things for everybody, public meeting law, et cetera, and then some of the things specific to that particular community.
I had that too, and I called it orientation training, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine, wonderful.
Are you just talking about new every year or for?
Well, at least the new ones. If they want to do it every year, that may not be that, at least for me.
I'm gonna write city officials, which encompasses everybody. The way I use the term, volunteers, boards, committees.
And I don't know if this could go under that one, but I think, Michael, you had something like this too, about like a diversity training for city officials that talk specifically about issues of race and class.
That would go into that, yes.
If that could be
I-
one of the items in the training.
Including, yes.
So you didn't mean that for staff?
I mean, it could be ideally for everybody.
Put that under here.
Regular training for new city appointees.
For
When you called it
all
city
new city
officials.
officials.
Officials, okay.
And that would include people serving on committees. Well,
Whatever you call it.
the one that I had was overlapping, but it covered a little bit more. Good. I'm hoping that later on. That could show up in a couple of different places.
One good route to this is NCTV, and we know how useful they are. So a real I don't know what we can do, but NCTV is a great resource, and if the city can find a little more money for that, that'd be great as well. We have our own NCTV here. But I think real support for NCTV would be a good thing that the city could try to do.
ACT.
I was gonna say that's ACT.
We need a board for cinematography in the city.
And that might include making more of the city meeting spaces friendly.
Yeah.
Wendy, did you get to make the second one?
I kinda added in with Michael on that one. I'll just throw one out, term limits and limiting multiple appointments.
The city council multiple appointments dilemma, we believe, is about to be resolved.
You mean, do you mean, I'll shoot.
Go ahead.
So when you said term limits, are you speaking about it, because there's two separate issues, there's the charter and then there's term limits within the ordinance, there's terms within the ordinance that are, so are you talking about terms for
Well,
committees or terms
I've
for
heard it from,
elected officials?
at all levels, and, both elected officials and being appointed as, to committees. Obviously not to positions if you're hired into a position, but elected officials and appointed volunteer officials. Putting it out there. Next.
Well, I mean, the piggyback on that one, to the degree, as David said, some of those are set in the charter. So one of the things I would put up there to accomplish that and other things is to look at establishing a charter review committee. And I think that has come up many times in public comment, in our discussions. We've done some piecemeal changes to it over the years, and it may be time to take a more comprehensive look at it, how it impacts on the structure of the city government.
Will you just identify some of the main things that the charter, what they would look at besides appointments?
Well, term limits, the role of the city council, the role of the mayor, the role of various aspects of the city government, like the financial part of it, almost the whole basic structure of city government.
If there's generally anytime you have a charter review, even if there's a driving force, as there often is in communities, they're sort of obligated to look at the whole document. But, you know, what's posted online at the website for charter, two different things. And one is the very messy thing that has the charter, and then you read on, you see that was deleted, but it wasn't. But then there's the code, which is a little easier to get around. That really needs to be cleaned up, because it's very hard to understand the charter the way the website has it, unless you're lucky enough to find the code book piece.
One of my recommendations, and maybe it's part of the charter review, or maybe is creating a citizen's guide to city government, some kind of a concise, like city charter for dummies, or something like that.
Do you think
It should be under there. It should be under the public
Yeah.
education.
Yeah.
So just something that if you're new to the city, it spells out for you.
Guide
There's
to-
9 counselors,
Yeah.
2 outliners, 7 more. I'll just sort of
Everybody
like
gets it like a phone
And
book.
that,
very basic.
that should also be available online, so
Exactly.
that should be part of the website.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. And it is up there. There is a brief description of city government, but some people may want to be able to have the charter be more accessible, or they hear the term charter and they don't really know what that means. And so, because like you said, if you go to the charter now, you're like, okay, wait a minute, that
It
got
was
deleted,
repealed.
okay, that got
Yeah.
repealed, and then you have to go to the acts of the
and it helps
legislature.
to know Old English.
Exactly, yeah. So,
It still refers to it as the alderman, I think. And
Yeah.
Adam?
It sounds like there's a great opportunity here for sort of a 1-hour city school video, in addition to perhaps a text presentation, but some people might find it easier just to sit back for 60 minutes and, they'll know the basics.
definitely multimedia, doing these things in multimedia so that because a lot of people may not go to the website and they may not want to download a 20-page PDF or something, but so if there is a video or something that's on NCTV or download.
Has everybody gone twice?
Has Jim gone to it?
Jim hasn't gone twice, so.
But I agree, I think Jim kind of took one thing
And
and
expanded
developed it.
Yeah.
It's not like we had very different and discrete things, and his was kind of very focused on,
Mostly on public input.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
It's all the components of a public input process.
Right.
Or a public input manual or something like that. These
Right.
are all things that would be part of that.
And he was the first out the door, so he didn't have the benefit of seeing how we approached this, if I recall.
Yeah. So we'll do a third round. David, how much time is there?
We are at, we have about 5.5 minutes left, or 45 minutes.
Should we always vote ourselves one time?
We can, because we're kind of combining the first two.
Okay.
We're already combining recommendations, which we had a half hour to do.
Can I add something to this the diversifying, making sure the committees are diverse?
The charter,
In limiting multiple, the appointments that reflects diversity, so that
Right.
boards and committees are more diverse, that they're not all.
but I don't want the charter review, at least from my point of view, ought to be really comprehensive. Look really at the city as a whole.
That's the way it is right now. I mean,
Okay,
charter.
Yeah.
but not as a function of looking at term appointments
Separate.
or.
No, wholesale.
thing, yeah.
And Wendy, the term limits one, I mean, this is one that we're gonna say, recommend, study or, I mean, we're not
We're
all
not making a
recommending-
recommendation for term limits. We're
Yes,
meant
okay.
to consider.
because I think we need a longer discussion on
Or
that one.
maybe,
Yeah.
on that and many,
Yeah.
and just reflecting back.
Yep.
So, third round, it seems like we're kind of getting down to it.
Yeah.
Alex?
Well, I'd recommend that that to be a permanent best practice committee that takes public comment, does ongoing research. This might also be combined with the
Yeah.
ombudsman
I would like.
Role that you had.
Not have the community advisory committee.
possibly the advisory committee as well.
Can I do
citizen-
slash permanent BP? Would that be okay, or do you really have something else in mind?
Well, I don't know, the Citizens Advisory Committee, I have never seen the ordinance, so I really don't know what it looks like.
There it is. It looks like with some chipping, some modification, it might,
We might be able to include that responsibility within the charge of that committee, but it's a possibility.
how about if I write and/or
Yeah,
permanent,
and/or, that's
and/or standing BP committee? How's that?
Okay.
We should definitely be term limited from serving on that.
Yes,
I'm volunteering.
We should be banned from having a separate.
yes.
But I'd also like, I guess my recommendation is that the city should consider creating a public information position with the mandate to inform and educate. It would run an ongoing city school program, would be also responsible for advertising openings on boards and commissions, the city's website, could staff the city advisory committee.
That was one that I had too. Not quite that expensive, but having a public information officer, both media and electronic.
Yeah, probably start with
Yeah.
at the webinar, but I think it could.
Adam?
Would that person kind of be, if the media or citizens wanted a specific document, like a specific budget document, then that person could facilitate that, so the citizen doesn't have to hunt down the right person in the city
Well,
to
she
like
would
get
be
it?
the city clerk, and if that's a problem, then I don't think you can.
I would think we would build, it would all the time be thinking with systems that make information, particularly documents, easily accessible. That somewhere in the city, somebody whose real function is getting out information, helping people find it or making it easily accessible.
That could be a nice feature, because sometimes for me, it's been a bit of a chase, which person in which department to get which thing. And if I can just ask one person for it, and they have to go find it, and then they bring it back to me.
Like the reference librarian of Northampton.
Right.
Right.
Well, I think that'd be great. Yeah, I think that'd be a big feature.
There's nobody in the entire city, including in the mayor's office, whose real job is informing people.
Did you ever have a model for that? Was there a model for that in the literature somewhere?
There's some mentions of it. I know I think in Somerville, one of the things I think it was Somerville, the new mayor there instituted sort of a public information. He did a kiosk and he did some other public information kinds of things as well, just to try to have more customer service oriented, one stop.
I've had ombuds down, I don't know if you feel that, I could
There's
slash that.
Could be there as well.
Oh, that one also could go with the BP committee kind of a
Yeah.
model too, because that was, as well, be a good place.
Yeah, I kind of actually see it in the advisory committee and not rather the public info,
What?
actually.
See what, I'm sorry.
the ombudsman role, best practice role.
That's our time
That's our
going
time,
up. yeah.
okay. Well, I think we could just extend it. We can go for another half hour and further get out any new recommendations and then just continue to group them. Does it sound good to people?
Yeah.
Can I put one out? Written, consistent, fair usage policies for use of city-owned buildings. Right?
Can you expand on that?
I think that they're not, the input we heard, from the outreach we did, was that people not sure where to go. Now, I know they've worked on developing a list, but it appears that there's inconsistency and there's some confusion about who to talk to, what's available, what rules there are, what it costs, what it doesn't cost, depending on who you are, what you are, if you're that kind of thing. Just having some kind of consistency about that and making that information available too, so it's not, like on the website. These are the meeting rooms that exist within city-owned buildings that could be available to the public, and these are the rules around it, something like that. So,
Right now it's a bit of a project.
Yeah, you gotta know who to call.
Right.
yeah, so just summarizing
Sure.
the way that
Yeah.
is that all right? Any else? Okay. And keep talking on.
I've got a couple left on my list, and I'm gonna throw out one of them. It's sort of piggybacking on the review of the city charter, but it's also a review of existing ordinances as well as city council rules to make sure that they fully incorporate some best practices. And, for example, city council rules, just one thing to consider to make sure it is as effective as it could be is the whole thing around the public session at the beginning of city council. And there are some assumptions about what that is and what that isn't, and I think we need to just be clear about that. For example, it's often said that there's the city council has limited the comments to 3 minutes, which is inaccurate. If you take my read, that is, we have never put a time limit on that.
It's discretionary.
That's the chair of the, right. So those are the type of things I think we should, so it'd be a rule of ordinances and city council rules.
Capture
Yep.
city council ordinance / rules review for best practices.
Excellent.
And I had one of my recommendations just for that public thing review piece, and there's stuff in the research. There's 4 or 5 different models of how other city councils do the research, so you could at least cite the research there.
Each city council can adopt new rules. So, so if you sort of wait for the new city council, they don't take it on as a project, we recommend it as a project. It just is gonna get done in the crevices, when there's time. You really need to, somebody needs to take the lead.
Well, the rules have been changed and a couple times systematically, but it's really hard to do for the organizational meeting, especially if you have new people there who
Right.
don't know what the rules are. So a lot of times they're adopted and then changed sometime during the session. Because you can change them in the middle of the session.
Well, how about making the recommendation that the next city council.
I wrote and updating.
But,
I wrote and updating.
yeah, but more than update, I mean, really take the council rules as a real project and really think about them, you inherit them, but.
Well, that could be a charge for the ordinance committee. Well, 3 of us are there, right? Well, I mean,
Or the committee on rules.
oh, the committee on rules.
That's
Yes.
what
Yeah,
we're supposed to do.
we're the committee on rules.
Yeah, exactly.
So we could do hearings
The
to
neighborhood
start
association.
reviewing. And we have done that periodically, so, but it's time from this prism, this point of view, to look at it from best practice.
I think
You had and it came up in InReach too.
right, using the neighborhood
Yeah.
groups. I think that I had that under the communication, expand forms of city public communication, so using the neighborhood groups, the coalitions to get out word. one that I wanted to touch on was coming from the InReach committee. And I just looked at it as, you know, how do you get, there's the whole external communication between the public and the city, but how do people within the city communicate with each other, and how does everybody know, you know, what the planning department is doing, and then what the city clerk is doing, and really getting that together and getting that running smoothly. So,
We did hear better internal communication.
yeah, better in however that, whatever that looks, maybe that's, you know, city socials where people have a day and they all get to meet each other and have lunch together, or, you know, open house, both for other city departments and the public to come in and go up to the planning department and see what they do, or, so some way for everybody to be on the same page internally.
I got it as sort of like sharing the protocols for who you let know. You know,
Right.
I should be in the loop on this. A few people said to us in the meeting, I wasn't in the loop and this happened. And a couple people said that.
Yeah.
Which eventually became a public issue too. That problem.
Throw out another one. This is related to the one that we talked about earlier with diversity training. But in general, I think the city has a responsibility for promoting tolerance and understanding between all groups, if people think of themselves as group members, but within the community. Northampton attracts a wide range of people, and there are some folks who are on some who don't necessarily feel comfortable in attending meetings and connecting because they don't feel welcome. And I think before you can get them in a room or ask them to join a committee, that you need to make sure that they feel welcomed and they connected to the community. And I think we've heard bits and pieces of that coming out. You know, that's part of the discussion around the solicitation ordinance. We've seen some other incidences of it too. So there are some people who very much feel like they're on the fringe in this community. So I think that's something that we could add.
I know that definitely if people don't look like you on a committee, you're probably not gonna think that they care what you say or feel like you should care what they say.
I'd written, recognize that democracy is messy and takes patience. Treat others as you think they would want to be treated, which is right in line with it.
So are there other ones that we're missing?
Well, I had, and I was looking for a place for it, possibly in the rules, the council rules or the charter. I think, and we heard from the public forum, the idea of the council having independent legal advice or maybe a volunteer legal committee. It needs, at least the way the legal advice is set up now, it doesn't have a really independent, it doesn't get an independent opinion. And I think it really needs one.
Read that out?
I wrote that as should explore the creation of a volunteer legal committee.
So Alex, just give me a succinct version of that, please.
Consider a volunteer legal committee.
Yeah.
Independent legal resources.
So you
Yes.
argued for
Develop an independent legal resource.
Okay.
Could I add legal and policy research? I mean, just not just legal. It could be
Research.
policy research, just broader, not just legal issues, but broader policy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify this? Are you saying that there should be other resources available to the council independent of the mayor's office? Or whether they're policy
Yes,
or
the
legal
city doesn't have a legal department anymore.
Right.
It hires
Yeah.
legal advice by the hour. So the council traditionally always had access to legal advice up until a few years ago, no longer, and I think it needs it. And it's come up in public, certainly over the landfill, but a lot of times it comes up.
Ken?
You know, I also think the city council needs a budget for legal advice too. You can have somebody volunteering, you wanna have somebody giving you an opinion that they will feel responsible for.
Here's my 2 cents. All I need is 2 cents. No, I'm just kidding, I'm making
Yeah.
a joke, yeah.
But that, exactly,
Legal
that's, you know,
advice.
that's what, well, you know, somebody will say, well, you know, it could go either way, but you know, you really do wanna have somebody who's gonna get paid to do the research and is actually going to, you know, sort of essentially take the case, so you really do need some sort of legal budget that you can call out. It's great to have the legal advice, but you also have to be able to say, you know, we need to hire a lawyer for a decision that the city council is making. We have to be able to have money when we need it.
Along those,
I was gonna bring up a separate one.
well, along those lines, and I don't remember perhaps who put this, but it goes with this, which is there needs to be resources for the council. You cut yourselves to nothing, and I might as well say it, not being a counselor, but I saw it among the recommendations, and if you're gonna be effective, you need a budget.
Yeah.
And so do your subcommittees and ad hoc committees
And advisory
and
committees.
advisory committees.
We have communities that don't even have staff.
While we're talking about the council, can I toss out increasing the counselor's pay?
Did you say decreasing?
Increasing.
Increasing.
Decreasing. What, to a negative number, billing them. No, a substantial increase in their pay.
I put that under budget.
Thanks.
It's a reminder.
I don't know that we heard, well, we heard that from you, Adam.
Yeah.
Just saying that.
Yeah.
Lots of other people.
I'm not sure we're gonna consensus on that one.
Jesus?
Might be worthwhile just to state what that, amount is and,
$5,000 a year
large.
plus health insurance.
okay, just for the.
But the
For
health
single-
insurance
it-
comes out of the 5,000, right?
Well, we pay 20% of the cost of our health insurance.
Which
It's
could
optional.
be worth
It's optional.
12 or 13.
And it's only for the counselor.
The city, school committees.
I mean,
Oh, you can't get a
yeah,
family
your
plan.
family.
Family
You
does
can't
not
have a
Yeah.
family plan.
Yeah.
Really?
What do you have? Sophia?
And certainly Michael did too. I wanna boil this down, but this was in the forum, someone in the small group I was with, and we've heard this consistently, and I think Anne also represents this, that we have a wealth of talent in the city, all kinds of things. We heard from Joel Russell, who's a national expert in land use issues, but we particularly have, among those talents, people with tech savvy. And we heard a lot of concern about the lack of state-of-the-art tech, you know, everything in the city, in this city government, whether it's the website or the, you know, and coverage of meetings or whatever, internal communication. So I just say let's tap the wealth of the city for its expertise, and I'll just put e.g. technology, and we can write other things. So, you know, really do that, and I said hold a summit or something. I mean, it's just I just feel like there's so many resources and people chomping at the bit, willing and wanting to help. So that's something I heard loud and clear.
I had one just like that too. My number 10 was the same, was explore creating opportunities for citizens who want to volunteer, other than running for office or serving on committees. I know the planning office always has like 5 or 6 interns that are in there entering GPS stuff or entering old permits, or you know, so they're using interns to help, you know, put all their stuff online and things like that. So, and there's a lot of cities that are doing City Year. You know, Boston has a program called City Year where people call it AmeriCorps, but you give a year of your service to the city and your expertise. So there's ways to look at things like that. Because we're certainly not gonna have money to pay for it. So.
Michael?
A number of these focus on the city council and how we do business, and then there was, early on, there was a focus on the budgeting process, and I think those are 2 clear areas that have caused some concern and controversy over the years. A third one that we haven't mentioned, and I think something that even started this rolling, is the planning department. And I do not have enough knowledge and expertise to begin making, some meaningful recommendations on that. But the planning department, in my recollection, and colleagues on the council can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have brought in various types of independent reviewers to review the police department, the fire department, every single, the financial, the DPW. And the planning department is one that we haven't given them that benefit yet. To bring in experts in their own field, and then maybe policies and procedures. And it has been extremely useful to all the other departments that we have done that with. So that would be
very good for the DPW.
Excuse me?
It's very good for the DPW.
And that would be one of my recommendations, is to support an independent, professional review of the planning.
I'd like to see that with, sort of citizen participation too, because I think there's enough interaction with the public and the planning department that, they should have an opportunity to voice, perhaps the way the rules go in public interaction with the planning department too.
So I'll open it up. Is there any other members of the best practices committee that have recommendations?
I had one, and I'll read it and then I'll reference. Consider the adoption of ethical standards for city government. This is something they're looking at in the city of Springfield. I have a 23-page document that's been proposed, and as you have been, if you've been reading the newspaper, it's Governor Patrick has just appointed a stellar committee of experts in this field to look at state government and particularly the legislature and higher levels of government. And I think it would be something that would be a novel thing and a good thing to do, not implying at all that anything is unethical, but it just is a really good practice. So, I would just say, where is it? I'm going to just say adoption of ethical standards. Above and beyond conflict of interest law. I think this is.
Best practice going to supply the ethical standards?
We have very, from what we have, our behavior, we have models.
I don't think I'd use
models out there.
Springfield as a model, but it's just my own.
That's what I was going to say.
Or the state for that.
Well, that's why there are two counselors in Springfield that have proposed a 23-page document, which I'm sure they do.
So are there any other recommendations from the 6 of us, and then I want to throw it open to the public?
Yeah, I'm dying to know if Casey still has one that we
Yeah.
missed.
Before you
We
go,
have a couple more.
I'm interested in
Yeah,
David's,
you can
is this one I really like, this outreach and education, is that included?
I guess it's,
Built into the
I
process?
think it would be part of that larger question of of the whole public participation
Protocol.
Okay.
But I think that's something we heard at the,
Over and over again.
at the Meadows Forum, and we heard it, it's in the research, it's in the Portland stuff, about, and there's even a few communities that mandated that they actually require that the developer has to hold a meeting. You just saw the Stop and Shop in East Hampton, I mean, they weren't required to, but they held a number of meetings with the affected neighbors before they went to the planning board.
That's great.
And so maybe it's not a requirement, but it's a recommendation that's in the, so that when a developer gets whatever materials from the city, that's in there that says, we highly recommend that you reach out and meet with the stakeholders. So I think that I assume we'll get these, and then there's lots of little various subsets that we can just add in as bullets beneath them, so.
Okay.
I just sort of counted up, there's about 23.
23.
Yeah, and there's some overlap, obviously.
And there was one other that was on my list, that I was just gonna, again, it's more under that, it's more under the overview of the city processes, but it was actually one that came up at our meeting with Terry Anderson, and I thought it was really good, and I sort of made it a recommendation, was like looking at the permit granting boards and really sort of revamping their whole hearing process. Because I think as we found out when we were trying to come up with our hearing, it's sort of like, we do it this way, this is the way we've always done it, but that doesn't mean that we have to do it that way. So making it less adversarial, making the hearing process.
Do you think it would fit in, or is it separate from reviewing planning department operations? Because
Or even reviewing, are they all covered by ordinance?
I'll put it separately, but
Some of them are state law, some of them are ordinance.
State law.
I mean, the 5 big permit granting ones are state law, but I mean, she had just simple things like, simple as don't say, okay, who are the proponents and who are the opponents, just say, speak, public speak, public comment, in general public comment instead of framing it in an adversarial way. And other, having a question and answer component built into the meeting so that then the public comment is more informed,
I see that as a subset of the very
Exactly,
first one.
exactly, yeah.
The very first
Yep.
one were about meeting
Exactly.
protocol, so this would be a
Yep.
subset of hearing meeting.
Yeah.
But it also, what I was thinking also is that could be something that could be, if they go ahead with some kind of a review of the planning department, write that into the RFP.
Yeah.
Take a look at the rules of procedure and the language and the,
So are there any other ones from the 6 of us?
I was reading Jim's, is everyone confident that we've put out his, I think his are all, like you said, pieces of a larger, public input piece, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, I think as we flesh out these, that Jim's will fall.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Is there any chance I could actually see his list? Because I remember
Sure.
that I really liked from his.
Sure.
Scott, did you have your hand up?
No, I
You
did
had
not.
a recommendation?
Okay.
So I'll throw it open now to the public if you all.
I think I know which one. Can I have councilors meeting with the board? Heard that from you.
Yeah, that was in my list, that the councilors and the mayor could be more active in meeting with their constituents ahead of time. If there's something coming up, have a meeting.
Anything else from public?
Yeah, actually, a lot of them were covered, which is the Citizen Advisory Committee and the Charter Review. I guess the only other one that I would think of is, this goes back to the City Council, which is how items get on the agenda. But it also goes to the kind of the greater idea of when an individual or group of residents in the city have a particular issue, how does it get dealt with? What are the actions that a person can take? And I found, just in my experience with the landfill issue, that if I wanted to get something on the agenda for the city council meeting, can't necessarily do that. It has to be, approved directly by the mayor. If there was a citizen advisory committee, presumably I could more easily bring it to, the agenda of the citizen advisory committee. But just that there is multiple opportunities and venues for a citizen to address a particular issue. And then, of course, as far as specifically going back to the city council agenda, on the Paradise City Forum, Ann Foley had posted this draft that came from, Berkeley, California, which was something called the Sunshine Ordinance, which is that any group of citizens in the community could, by a petition of 25 people, put something on the city council agenda. So.
Adam, you had your hand up?
Propose that city councilors hold some sort of regular office hours. The public can just come maybe once a month and do this for a couple hours, experiment with that. And then also, I don't know if we've covered this, but propose that there be certain standards for publicizing agendas and minutes. So perhaps agendas be available electronically 48 hours before the meeting. The preliminary minutes come out at some point, 48 hours if that's enough time after the conclusion of the meeting. And that they stay online and accessible for some period of time, maybe 10 years. So I wanted to make sure that was
I guess I'd just like to propose that, we could be, the best practices committee could be clear, about how things are going to happen. The way I look at city council is wanting to have very specific recommendations that they can essentially just rubber stamp, saying, well, you guys looked into, you city councilors and everyone looked into it. Unless I have some real objection, I assume you guys did the research and you're the authority, and yes, we're just gonna rubber stamp this. But if you make certain recommendations like, well, you know, the city council should look at this, and, you know, I can see, yes, the ordinance committee should do this and that type of thing, but then have very specific recommendations coming back that essentially the city council is going to expect to be able to rubber stamp unless they have some real objection to say that I have a reason to object, you know, to this. But then that also kind of means that you have to have, you know, a continuing best practices committee, because if you make a very specific recommendation on the protocol for public comment and things like that, you're going to try it out, and then 3 months from now you can say, well, that works, but it doesn't work all that well, and somebody else has an idea to make it better, and then you have to be able to say, well, we would like to try this, so you're gonna put that up to city council and give the reasons why this is better. And this is a, you know, this is a process, but that's the only way that this is really going to work, is to have, you know, us get what we know down to the point where people are comfortable with it, which, you know, so I guess that's the way I'm seeing it, and I don't know if that's the way you're planning on presenting it, or that's the way you see it.
Well, they're making the recommendation that there be an ongoing, either the Citizens Advisory Committee that would do that function, or Best Practices Committee.
Right.
That would.
And you're planning on having specific recommendations going to city council, you know, very specific recommendations going to city council and saying, you know, this is what we say that you should do, and just pass it, unless you have some reason to object. I mean, have the details down to the point where they can essentially say, yes, let's do it that way.
I'm not certain we can get that
We
done in
can't,
a short time.
we cannot.
Okay. No, and not in a short time, but I'm saying eventually. This is the way it has to go to city council, where they can say, yes, we're gonna pass that, and I just don't know from here, you know, to there, what the mechanism is where you get to it, and I'm sure.
Michael, then Casey.
Yeah, I had a similar thought, and just an example is on the protocols, I guess the first one, the protocols for meetings. That's one of our recommendations. During the course of our 90-day hearing, there may be enough information, enough time when we start drafting, we have a draft protocol, and when we come back with the final report, in fact, we could have a draft protocol that we ask them to endorse. I mean, that isn't without the realm of possibility. So that's one of the things that could happen in that 90 days. Before the first meeting in December, unlikely, but before, in that 90-day period, something may develop around some of these possibilities.
Jesus?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as this list that's, you know, being compiled so far, it looks really good, and I think some of them are kind of, you know, these broader desires of what city government should do, and that would probably fall on the, like, executive summary part of the report, or some kind of, you know, overview of it, and then there would be the recommendation specifically, and then there would be the more, things that might take longer, like, the protocol for a meeting could be referred to a particular committee, or if the advisory committee gets actually formed, then there's a whole list of things for them to do, clearly. Oh, could I read off that recommendation that
Sure.
Jim's? Just because I want to make sure that it was, and I guess I did already say it, but I just wanted to reiterate it. Concerned citizens should be provided an accessible format which alternatives, objections, suggestions, and areas of agreement can be effectively communicated, with the expectation of having all relevant issues addressed by the city. I think that's really important.
Could we take a brief break?
Yeah.
We're actually 43 seconds.
Oh, we can stay for the 40.
No, I just mean
43
we're
seconds.
right on
That's
schedule.
perfect. That's great.
Yeah.
So is that all of the recommendations?
Well, since we have 40 seconds, I just wanted to make clear that I think because of what we've been talking about, the city council has to know that they really have to make some committee permanent in order to institute best practices at all, because you can't just finish it. So it goes to say, if you want to have best practices, you have to have a standing committee.
Okay, so we'll take a 10-minute break.
Okay.
And
Come
can you
back.
just review again what?
I think at this, like
committee-
Bob made a point, we don't really need to go into small groups.
Right.
I think that at this point, we can further try to condense them. I think that we could even get some of these down even tighter. And then figure out what to do from there. If we each wanna take a couple and flush out the language and expand them.
So one way to do that is I've got not that much information up there, but I have a short summary of each of those proposals, I believe, in the minutes. And I prefer to work from those instead of what's on the board, because if we gotta have what we agree to, then I'll have to do it all over again.
Well, we all know what's up here, we see it, but we don't know what you wrote down.
Well, so what I'm proposing is that I would read to you what I have written down, and you can say what you think.
I would rather, I feel like that would be time consuming, I would rather we let you take a photo, as we
That's
did.
what I was gonna say, take the
As we
photos,
did.
yeah.
That
Oh,
worked
right,
very
right.
well before. Thank you.
Take a photo of the board once we're done.
Yeah,
So that means we have to erase some stuff? I bet, because we're not gonna agree on everything on there, I don't think.
Yeah, I think we're gonna go through some kind of a process when we reconvene to ferret out.
Okay,
So,
and then how will we get it to electronic form, that we can get it to other people?
We'll talk about that after the break.
Okay.
I don't know anyone who's done.
We'll take a break and then we'll let our minds think about
Okay.
that.
I think our brains
Or
will
not
come up
think
with
about it.
something during our non-focused,
Okay, so we'll be back in 10 minutes.
That
You
was-
have the pad.
thank you, thank you everybody.
Yeah, that
I
was
feel-
great.
Yeah, I feel good about that.
I think rather than trying to eliminate anything, we should just start at the top and work our way through. If stuff doesn't fit, we get rid of it.
Should we start?
So I just wanna, so you wanna go do basically another run through it all to make sure everyone's comfortable, or you wanna try to start reorganizing it as we go through, or?
Reorganizing as we go through, trying if things can be combined, pop out, and go together.
Should we allow for elimination too, as a
Well, as
conversation?
we bring them up, I think that will automatically come up if there are people who object to one.
Jesus?
Yeah, well, I had a pretty good idea of how some of this could be organized. As we're reviewing the list of them, maybe we can take some of those off the list and add them to a separate list. Like, we have about, I think maybe 4 of them that have to do with just the public process, like, and interaction with the public, and those could probably be grouped together in a summarized recommendation. And then we have others that are very specific recommendations that if we sent it to the city council, they could act upon it immediately, like form a citizen advisory committee, or what was another one, or form a charter committee, but like something like support NCT TV coverage of municipal meetings, that goes more into a bigger list of things that we can do that are better, in the way of public outreach.
So, yeah, I would just suggest that we go down each of them, and then we can say, the first one, standard meeting, hearing forms, protocols. I think that's redundant with another one on the list. So we could match it and then kind of flush it out.
Yeah, well, and that's also one that's like that's one of the recommendations or things on the board that is incomplete. That's something that would have to say, even if everybody here agreed that needed to be done, it would need to be set aside, and you would have to make a specific time during another meeting to actually formulate a protocol for a meeting.
I think that'll also just actually happen just as you're doing things. You'll just notice that you're repeating something or that it fits there, so you can pretty much start anywhere.
Well, one thing we could do is as we start moving through the list, is if there's one that we agree on as being kind of an overarching, we could put a number to it. Okay, this is, okay, number one. And then we could go back and see if there's one pieces that would fall under that. And then we could just,
One A, B,
1A,
one
right,
B, one C.
right, so they belong, we know what they belong.
Yeah.
Um,
Do we wanna do this on a separate sheet of paper, or we've got that big notepad over there?
I could do it up here and then we can, or, I don't know.
Let's do a first round,
Yeah,
this
let's
and
just
see
go
where
through,
we
see if
end
there's,
up. and
yeah,
then-
yeah.
Alright,
You
so
could
we've
put-
got
you could
30
put
minutes.
Start
ones and
numbering, yeah.
Numbering them in the different order.
Alright, so the first one, standard meeting, hearing, forums, protocols.
Develop a protocol for all public meetings.
So we're just gonna do the thumbs up, thumbs down on each one? How do you wanna do it?
Yeah, we could try that. So how many people here are generally in favor of some form of this?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's everybody.
That gets a green star.
Greens,
It gets a number.
Good.
There's one.
That's fine,
One,
okay.
good.
okay, so the second one would be public education, i.e. work on budget with details, make it very accessible. So broad category, improving public education about city government, budget, that kind of thing.
I heard that as two. I really heard a focus on the budget, and then I heard a general public education one. I, for one, would like to keep the budget with a separate focus.
Keep it separate?
Yeah,
I think,
and then
yeah.
this under the budget, this is
Well, more
kind of
transparent.
really
Yeah,
Okay.
to
that's
the-
right, under that.
So, 2A, right?
Mm-hmm. So all in favor of that general recommendation?
So I just wanna make sure, so I thought, Michael, you were saying you wanted budget to be separate.
Yeah.
Well, that, if we look
From
at
general
two
education.
as looking at the budget, the very next one is a general, more of a general.
Yeah.
So, right.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor of the budget? Okay, that's number 2.
And 2A?
And 2A. Keep it any
Are there any
conversation on that one?
No, no. I don't.
Jesus?
Well,
Sorry.
there was something about a citizens budget advisory committee, which is a whole new proposal, you know, different from anything. I don't know if you want to develop that more to, or just go, stay
we
pointed
could-
or
Those
move
are-
forward.
those are different
That was
ideas
gonna
that
be
fall
my
under
comment.
it.
Okay.
So it's actually gonna be my comment, which is, everybody seems to agree on the desire that, all documents, you know, relevant to the budget that could be made available, should be made available to the public. But the question would be, how would that gonna get done, and then I guess that would be the answer.
And we could flush that out.
Just to form the committee to do that.
Well, from what I heard about the budget, it was not only, it wasn't citizens, it was the council as well, who didn't necessarily have everything they needed to know about the budget. I heard that.
Right, David was very specific, right, about having an educational component of the budget, building the budget.
Yeah, I think trying to create a public, some kind of a public input part of building the budget, of the budget process, earlier in the process, before you get to the actual final budget of council.
Around the budget itself or around the priorities of the services? That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, we have these hearings every year where we hear from department heads about how they're formulating their budget, but there's usually not a lot of public interaction or input in that, and so.
Rarely any public attendance.
Or press attendance for that matter, so I guess if there's a way to maybe, look at that, look at the issue, you know, if you're dealing with some other huge public policy issue, you try to do forums around it, you try to do, well, this is $76 million issue that drives every other issue in the city, so.
I mean, that was underlying my thing, was that this is a huge part of what the city does, and it needs to be an educational, public educational component.
And we heard positive feedback at the forums about that people liked the budget meetings that were
Yeah,
held.
the mayor's budget roadshow.
That people thought that was good, you know, people who didn't understand Proposition 2.5, so they'd been to one of those or something like that, so that was feedback we got, so.
And I think that, you know, after we go through this process, you know, we each can take a couple and flesh it out and create those details, and then we can bring it back. But overall, people agree that, you know, the budget should be transparent, and there should be some kind of educational process that happens.
Can I take a little diversion while this is on my mind? And that is in line with what you were just saying. I would like us all to be thinking about, as we did recommendations, hats on the back and what works well, and think about those things that the city is doing. And I think Bob did a little of this in his recommendations. Things that have either been inspired by our existence or would have happened anyway, things like city school or the mayor's budget process this year. You know, just recognizing the report and for all of us to give that some thought and maybe bring that to the next meeting too. Of things we might want to include to say, hey, this was good, you know, we've done this well.
And that's yeah.
Includes the hearing.
Yeah. I'm not trying to make, but I think that's part of what I'm saying too, is I think the budget document that we have is really good, but how do you make it come alive for people who aren't gonna sit there and read it? So.
But there, of those things that are good and have occurred, a lot of them are not kind of formalized or
Right,
written into any
institutionalized,
process, so
yeah.
they could disappear with a change of
Right,
person.
so if we mention it and
Yeah,
give it
exactly.
some, shine some light on
Right.
it, if we can recommend.
To maintain it, keep it.
And that's why I use the word formal, is because I think things like the budget meetings in the city or the board, I don't say anything about a meeting at the board, but I think building that into the process.
Is there a document, you know, sort of like the charter where it would, you know, we would have city rules and how things, are there rules for the city budget? You know, now, is there a document that says this is the way the budget is? And maybe that would be the best format for us to organize things under existing rules.
I don't think so. I think there's a huge body of public law that says what you must do, but it's not decipherable for normal people. It's mostly for auditing. But it may be, and worth.
Read the Advocate's article on free cash this week.
Okay, so number 3
Yeah.
would be public education. So this would be a general, not just focused on the budget, efforts to improve public education, including multimedia, city schools, forums, creative, door-to-door education, bulletin boards, that kind of thing.
And then you had utilizing neighborhood groups.
Yeah, I think when we get to stuff, we'll point that, yeah.
Okay, so in general, is everybody in favor of that recommendation? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So that next one, expand forms of city public education. Okay, that's the next one. Different from education.
Yes.
Expanding the ways that the city communicates, the city and the public communicate.
Well, so we might take the one before about public education. The public education really is a communications process, and it goes two ways. The city says to the citizens, what do you think about X? The citizens say, don't like it, or sounds great, or whatever they want to say, and then the city responds. So I think that education, in many cases, the kind of education that will be most useful to the citizens and the city is communication. So if we can have a good system that will do both, I think that can be one single recommendation.
Michael?
I agree with Bob that there's overlap there, but I think it's enough to stand by itself as well, and realizing there's gonna be overlap on a number of these. When we go over here, I think there's several of them that we could plug underneath this one. But not all, there are times when we have to do a better job of communication that isn't necessarily part of an educational effort. And there's been a few examples of that recently. So I think that's something that we really have a responsibility to do as a city. And in conjunction with education, but I think there are instances where it's not only.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Michael, but my one concern here is, are we gonna have 15 or 7?
Well,
And so that's the
Well,
argument
let's
I
go
would
back
make
and
for
see how
combining
many-
them
yeah.
perhaps later.
Let's see what happens when we
that's
get
fine.
there.
But I could see, for example, the whole thing about the website falling underneath
Right.
this.
That's
This is-
exactly what I
That's
was
right.
saying.
That's right.
Under
That's right.
communication.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so
That's
I
right.
think, whereas it's not necessarily under education, so I
Right.
think.
Public information officer.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Is,
so I think there's, so I agree with keeping them separate, cause there's enough,
Alright,
some difference.
Okay.
so should we vote
All
on
right.
4?
So keeping 4 separate
Yep.
for the time being. Blocking?
We're gonna hit this for the time being, it's okay with me.
Well, then, should this be 4A?
I think it's part of communication.
4A for this one, so that these are really connected?
Yes.
So, do
But
you want me to read it?
Collapsible body.
Great website, consistent standards through all offices, committees, user-friendly, communication to citizens, email, lists, calendar, online calendar, everything posted. So that, yeah, that would be 4A. Okay. All in favor of that one? Okay. So next one, revise appointment process for committees.
Can I write add markers to room?
Yeah.
Is that when you say consistent standards for all the offices, boards and committees, that was also the reporting, the idea of having your,
Wait,
your,
Yeah.
your minutes up in
Top
48
line.
hours?
Great website, consistent standards.
Oh, yeah, so that, one department is the best practice and another is not, can't find it, it's nothing.
So this next one, revise appointment process for committees. Democratic, transparent, recruitment options, appointments committee, outreach, citizens committee.
I was okay with that, I thought when it came forward, it was review the appointment process.
What was review and revise?
Yeah,
If necessary.
Well,
I left off
might not need any
review.
revisions.
no, I'm just saying, if you're gonna say revise, then you may need to say exactly what it is,
Well,
If
these
you're
are,
calling it out for review, then you can call out some of the things that need to be looked at. I don't know.
I'm comfortable with review and if necessary, revise.
Yeah.
So I think any reviewer will come up with revisions.
Yeah,
Because it's not, it's not formalized. They don't
Yeah.
have to use one of your earlier words. It's not formalized.
exactly.
Okay, so review the appointment process for committees. Is everybody in favor of that? Any concerns?
well, I feel strongly about revising, I think we heard loud and clear that people want change in that, and, review precedes revising, we review because we don't have at this point, a specific recommendation, we have different ideas that came up, but I would prefer to say we feel strongly review, a little stronger than reviewing.
Alex and then Jesus?
Well, I started off by, in my version of this, that the council take a more active role in recruitment and appointment. But I guess I don't know. The end result should be a written, a written guide, a written process.
Proposal?
Yeah,
From
that
us?
with the end, that the revision and review will end in a written public process.
Oh. That,
Written,
and who does the revising and review?
well, either the council or a council committee, I mean, it's a council and a mayor function, so either they're gonna do it or they're gonna appoint a committee to do it.
Okay, I guess my question is, are we gonna make a more specific recommendation? Or do people anticipate that we will make a more specific recommendation?
This is one of those areas that, as we go through a 90-day hearing process,
Okay.
you may hear more precise and pointed comments on that too, so.
And I mean, I see what you're saying, Wendy, about not letting folks off the hook by saying just review. And like, okay, we've reviewed it, now we're done. I see what you're saying.
Well, I'm actually saying we might be able to, because of what we've heard and read and the work
Yeah.
that we've done, come up with some ideas about it, and also what's possible without making too many changes, what might necessitate some real
structural change,
Yeah.
you know,
See,
so that's what I meant.
I was saying, like, I was thinking you could say review the committee appointment process and make revisions to make it more democratic, transparent, you know, sort of with an eye toward revisions, making it, so having it both in there. I wasn't saying just review it for the sake of reviewing it, but in the absence of very specific recommendations. Yeah, okay.
Well, I wrote now, I review, possibly revise.
Yep.
Okay.
Ken?
And I was just wondering, you know, it might be a good idea to start thinking about, you know, grouping things under the, I mean, this doesn't apply to any other, you know, group in the city. This is really just a city council thing, so, you know, this would fall under city council rules, and if you were gonna recommend it, you would either be saying that we're going to add this as a rule that city council would follow, but, you know, just, I think in some way of
It's a mayoral.
presenting it. Yeah,
It's
right,
mayoral power
exactly.
and council.
But if you end up, the problem is that there's how it actually works now, and how the law and is set, and I really think that it's important that however the appointments are done, that the real way it's done be transparent, that be written, that in fact the mayor makes all appointments with, as the council has never, in recent memory, ever turned any of those appointments down, nor it doesn't, I don't know, it's just not, the council has a written role, has a written legal, but in fact, never, doesn't really take any part in it.
I don't think that's quite true, Alex. I mean, the council members do interview the recommendees and speak to their particular skills. Perhaps the quality of the nominations has been so consistently good. But the council does pay attention to who these people are and that they have interest in and knowledge about the activities of their board and committee. It didn't just a rubber stamp.
Okay, rather than getting to a big debate, I'd rather just, yeah.
All right.
Is that
five?
But I wanted to,
That would
I
be
mean,
5.
I'll just add to what Alex said. I mean, what I said in mine was that review practice, review research, look at examples and best practice research on ensuring that the city council more fully exercises its oversight role and authority in the process. So do more oversight on the appointment process, which we have the power to do, and exercise the authority more strongly, which we, you know.
All right, so right now, the language, just review and possibly revise appointment process for committee. And I think, again, that once,
For committees and boards and commissions, I assume would be.
and then once, somebody takes a hold of this, we can flesh out all those details and then come back and work that out. So all in favor of this general principle? Okay, so there's 5. All right, resolutions, statements, revision.
Good question.
Jesus.
I don't, maybe this has been mentioned already, but maybe as we're going through these recommendations, it should be good to state who, as you are going to be making the recommendations to the city council, who it is that you're going to be asking to be responsible for the specific recommendation. Like, for example, is it gonna be the council on appointments that's going to address this? Is the best practice committee gonna make a recommendation how appointments should be done? And then
Well, I thought that would happen at the last meeting.
Yeah,
I
we're
think
getting
at
to
this
that.
point,
We
we're
aren't there yet.
We're just
Very
trying to
basic.
Okay.
We're doing the rough
all of
outline.
these
Yeah.
stay in the,
Okay, so what, I'm
Down the
confused about this next one. Resolution, statement, city vision, citizen engagement, ethics, best practices and
that was mine, and again, I kind of looked at what people had already proposed and tried to come up with other things that I felt were filling in the gaps, and it's just an umbrella thing, right? And someone, when I said that, said it could be a resolution.
Yeah.
I was saying if the city could have a vision or a mission statement, was how I framed it, committing itself. It's an organization. Businesses have vision and mission statements. It can be, just like every other, and someone said that this is in the Sustainable Northampton Plan. I'm not really sure who the plan applies to. But anyway, someone
I
said
was
it could
just
be a
gonna
council resolution.
Yeah, and that's sort of how this whole process started was a group of citizens came forward asking for a resolution similar to the one that Portland and Vancouver, and that's what Bob mentioned in his recommendation. So I think that should make sense to have that be part of it.
Part of what I was thinking when
I mean, it's obviously it's a statement. It's not it's not a, but it's putting us on record that we want to abide by those principles.
what I had in mind when I thought about it was sort of a recommitment to the mission, you know, and to think about this, you know, to not to just put it in the forefront of the way city operates, not just by the council, but all the employees and committee members and all that. Michael?
Yeah, and I would hope that it's something that we could draft and actually propose. That we could act, and that would be at least one of the things that we could accomplish.
That's a good idea.
There is an adopted vision that's going to outlast the committee, this committee.
The only problem with this is usually visions and missions come out of the strategic planning process, and people get to that point, and they develop it, and they have the buy-in because they created something together. So it's not necessarily the appropriate thing for another group to come in and say, adopt this, you know, but you've kind of done it, as David has said, by setting up this committee.
And I think for me is I would want that to be backed up by some kind of action plan. So not just, you know, this is our resolution, we're just gonna say that we're gonna adopt this, but to really show, you know, how are they gonna implement it? So to have it be a resolution that's backed by some kind of commitment to action. So, I guess all in favor of the general recommendation of adopting a resolution or statement of a city vision or commitment to best practices, ethics, that kind of thing. Sure. Alex?
Yeah.
Is that a?
Sorry. I have a stubborn thumb.
Okay, 6. That's really good. All right, identify, communicate with stakeholders early on in the process. I think that could be folded in to another,
To number,
Yes.
to number 1.
I think
Decision
number 4.
Number 4?
You're right, but it does cut across a whole bunch of these different.
I think the deciding early on if a decision needs public input. And then going to the stakeholders early, wasn't that the
That's a fine way to do it. Yeah.
context?
4B, expand forms of city.
You would say that would be a rule for a committee though, or a rule for every committee?
It seems to relate to the first one in those instances where there's going to be a hearing and decision. You know, that's part of the built-in protocol is that there's an effort to identify and communicate with the stakeholders involved in that particular decision. So if you're gonna have a hearing on whatever it is, building something, tearing something down, whatever, is that you identify who's that.
So
You know, I can give it an example, I don't know if you want examples, but for example, the educational overlay district, because it was not a zoning ordinance, that there is a requirement that when they're doing a zoning ordinance, that they contact abutters. But this was not a zoning, it's an overlay. So when they were discussing it for our open forum, none of the people affected were contacted. So, I mean, that would, to me, fall in that, and I could see very much under hearings of forum protocols.
See, I was gonna suggest that we amend number 1 and say standard meeting and public participation protocols.
On decisions, you know, not just one manhole, but, you know.
I mean-
what we're talking
I'm fine with that, I think that's a good idea.
Because I mean, some communities call it a meeting protocol, and then you've got Portland, which calls it a public participation protocol, which is essentially how to run meetings and ensure that you have public participation in them. So-
Yeah, just call it 1A and say C1A up here, you know, mold it or meld in somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Well,
don't wanna total, I mean, one part of that is gonna be just sort of nuts and bolts of how a good meeting is run, but then there's a part of that which is how do you ensure that people actually come to your meeting, are participating in the meeting, or at least have an opportunity. So I don't know whether it should be called out as a separate item, public participation,
Right.
as a separate standalone item, so that it's not given short shrift as just sort of like a
Right.
meeting protocol, or whether it's part of the same thing.
Adam, you had something?
I'm not quite sure the appropriate place to insert this, but another example that comes to mind about sort of informing stakeholders in an early stage of the process is the wetlands ordinance, and a perception among certainly some of my neighbors that the interests of people who live in town districts where 10 and 35-foot buffers came to be enacted weren't really aware that this was going on until it was very far along in the process, and then they started getting feedback from counselors that, where have you been? We've been talking about this for 2 years, you're too late, we're done with this. And whereas our perception was that, say, the Chamber of Commerce or Broadbrook Coalition had been invited to that conversation, and a lot of negotiation had taken place, but it was sort of the interests of, in-town wards like Ward 3 that was, most imperiled. That was very frustrating. And so it would be interesting to look at that as a case study about where could the perceived losers in that bargain have been involved.
Alex?
Well, to piggyback on that, using that exact example was that a section of stakeholders were really people in routinely flooded areas, people in floodplains were not broken out. It wasn't a flooding project, the wetlands. So it seems to me until late in the process. And it seems to me that because you haven't gotten to those stakeholders, that you start the process again. Because you missed, in fact, a whole chunk of people who should have been part of it. So I guess I just want to add that part, that if you don't do that, or if you fail to meet that criteria, that you start again.
Michael?
And that is really connected with the whole protocol thing, because
Yeah.
what happened was when that came forward from the Conservation Commission, they had no public forums. And the ordinance committee asked them to go back and have one or two public forums, which I think they had two on the same night, one at different places in the city on the same night. So to me, that's very much of a protocol, that when you're having, making a major revision to an ordinance, that you have a protocol that builds that in early on, and what happened is it became an add-on, and at some point in time, the Chamber of Commerce didn't even know about it. That was one of the things that came up, and then the Broadbrook Coalition didn't know about it, and everybody kind of discovered it as it went along, and every time that happened, we had to go back to the beginning, and we get to the point where Adam just experienced the tail end of that.
So Wendy?
Well, two things. One, I was gonna say, the more I hear it and the more I think about it, the more I think this stands alone. It's so critical, it's so important. Yeah, it relates to that, but in some ways, from my own feeling is it relates more to what I put up here as a vision or a mission that all officials in this city think about the citizens. And they do that by thinking about who are the stakeholders and how they do whatever they do. So I would like to argue for it to just be separate, because this really is about a meeting protocol, I understand how it relates, but to me this has such a charge to it, and it just comes up over and over again, so.
So if you could just say, create a public participation policy or protocol, and then start subgrouping these under it.
So did we decide that the resolution or vision was not something that we were giving a number to? It's separate?
No, we did decide on a number.
Just didn't get a number
Just
yet.
running out of ink.
Oh, okay.
Running out of ink.
So I could see that one as being both like a 1A as well as a 6A.
Yeah.
That is applying in both, it should be in both.
Yeah, I would agree with David, in some kind of separate, I don't think it can go under 1A, but also another category that's some kind of protocol for decision making. Like, like Portland did. And that's one step in the
Right.
process. That's like an early on step, but that we illustrate a whole process of that.
I think we have to come to a decision.
Yeah, but
Just keep moving.
in general, people agree with identifying and communicate with stakeholders early on in the process
Yes.
as a best practice,
Yes.
however,
Yes.
whatever form it
Yes.
comes into. Okay. All right, next one. Citizens Advisory Committee return in some form or a standing best practice committee or ombudsman
No, not or, but,
slash.
that's right.
Does that seem to go with the better communication piece, with maybe our fourth one?
I see that.
4 and 4A?
I think I see that possibly as being a little bit more than that. Because we're giving a forum, and the communication thing is sort of like what we're saying to citizens and back and forth. They could have their own say, but frankly, so it's a little bit more independent than that. So,
I think it could be 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, but, I think that this
Okay.
kind of is an umbrella to so many of these things.
So overarching, do people agree that this should be a resolution?
Well, we've heard a lot of people say that the best practice committee shouldn't just end, that it should live on, so part of the recommendation.
Zombie best practices.
I'm not necessarily in that camp, but there's a, this video committee, but, so maybe the recommendation is an overall recommendation of an ongoing, some kind of an ongoing citizen advisory role, best practices and good government, et cetera. And then underneath that is, just look at the CAC, the existing CAC model and see if it can be modified to fit that, or look at some other standing best practice committee, so sort of, I don't know.
I agree with that. And whatever is developed under 6 for that, there's a statement, a vision, that could be part of the charge of creating that committee. I think it needs to be closely tied into.
So maybe I'm just saying not have this, not have the CAC. I think we've been thinking, where do we group the CAC as one of the other, but create a sort of a recommendation of which the CAC and the Standing VP Committee and the Ombuds are sort of the 3 subcomponents of. So it's just sort of slightly rewording that.
Yeah, I think we have to word it, but the concept of having an ongoing presence to.
Yeah.
Check and balance.
A
Right.
formalized, ongoing citizen role.
What its charges is, we don't know yet.
So all in favor of that resolution?
That we need some kind of, there should be some
Some kind of
future best
ongoing-
practices that,
Or whatever we decide to call it.
which could be the CAC.
Yeah.
It's a recommendation.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Is that 7?
So that's 7.
Okay.
Okay.
Tell me which 7 are. We got the standard protocol, the budget process more open, public education, better communication, review appointments, mission statement, vision statement, early and communication, which is 7, and a future body, which is 8. Did I count right?
One off.
That's good, you're ahead of us. Okay.
I don't know where, maybe the 2, I think the first 2 are 1.
Okay.
The second and third one are actually one recommendation.
We'll figure out a way
Yeah.
to create one out.
I think if Adam just takes 4 good photos of this at the end and just
Okay.
emails them to us, that'd be great.
So this is, what is that one?
First, review significance of policy decision project and assess the and implement public education involvement process.
We've got that in up above explicitly.
For identify the stakeholders?
Yeah.
So that, yeah, that's part of that process.
So let's link it to, which one is that?
To identify and communicate with stakeholders.
Give me numbers.
The
1A.
1A. Did we decide that that was standalone?
So that was the one where maybe you're coming up with an extra number, because I don't know if we did, if we decided to keep it part of 1.
Well, I wrote 1A, 6A, or alone.
Okay, so we weren't,
What
we
are we
didn't decide
doing?
on that, but that could get coupled with that one.
Oh, I definitely don't think it's 6A.
Okay.
So that's really speaking to this need for developing a whole protocol around involving the public in major decisions. Right? That might
Do you
be a
remember who
blanket.
suggested it, and once you feel that that does go?
I wish I had suggested it as a recommendation.
Okay, so how about,
If people would accept it as a,
I'm gonna put
'Cause
A. How's that?
I
I
just,
don't know,
well-
somehow we didn't do that right then and there, but.
I don't think it hurts to keep it I just think there's a lot of other things under it that could be separate, if you kept it separate, but it can be part of one too.
What,
That's also, we have
One
to,
B?
well, I see it very much connected to one, and I think the A and B to me isn't necessarily significant, we're just lining
Yeah, we're
things up
grouping
and
things.
grouping
Okay.
things.
Yeah.
Because in terms of a decision-making thing, I think when something is really important, I think there's a responsibility to say, okay, here's a significant decision, this is what it is, inform the public, and then start a process to take that information. And I think all too often, it seems a little bit backward, where we make a decision and then towards the end, we're getting public input. And I think that's what that addresses.
Is this Jen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alex?
I think I agree, but I think that the identify and communicate early stakeholders is standalone, that the public participation is kind of its own item, that it was so important, particularly from the public forum, but in setting this, what?
The Meadows Forum too.
Meadows Forum too, that making, that part of the process of decision-making is deciding whether you're gonna go out to the public or not. And if you are gonna go out to the public, then you really need to do it right away, and there ought to be a whole, a protocol. You identify, you really think about who the stakeholders are, you get a hold of them early, you bring them in, I mean,
I
we
think
have
that
these.
Joel presented that, and there's the ladder of public participation, I'm probably familiar with that. I think that and 1A and 1 are part of a public participation category.
Okay.
Michael?
Yeah, it was going to basically support that, because I think what we're asking is the people who are making those decisions, the committees who could potentially be making those decisions, is to do that. So I think it all goes back to the practice of those bodies that are going to be acting on permits or changing things or whatever, to build that into their process.
Yeah.
It's not like there's a separate committee that is out there, something every aspect of the city has to own that. So I really see that as part of the protocol, as my initial response.
But, all right, well, I would do, the next step is, the person who actually makes and starts most of or a lot of the decision-making in the city is the mayor. And it's not through a committee, or it's not, the decision to, I don't know, to build a
hotel?
well, to sell a piece of city property may begin at the finance committee level, but it's much more likely to come out of the mayor's office. How do you bring I assume that we're applying this process to all parts of, that's not boards and committees, but to elected.
That's where the resolution and mission statement is in. Because, there is a reason why cities have mayors, and that's to streamline decision-making, and it's not intentionally meant to cut out the public, but it's to be able to, negotiate out of the public spotlight for your best position and, to streamline decision-making, so.
Right, but what we're asking is, if you're gonna go to public at any point for public input, do it as soon as you can. That's sort of over and over again, it seems to be what we're saying.
There are cases where city departments have surplus property that they choose to sell. They have to get the mayor's permission, but the move to sell the property does not begin with the mayor.
Right, but it's still not happening in a public venue. It's happening internally
in in the departments,
Right,
right, like the
There
school
isn't a
department or the
meeting or-
DPW.
right.
I think we're getting a little bit stuck on
Right.
this one.
We gotta
so I
keep
just
going,
wanna
cause we
keep
got
going.
15 minutes.
So
But I think you raise a good point.
I mean, I think again, if we just expand make number one, say, standard meeting, hearing, forum, process and public input protocols or something like that, so that you're talking about the process of actually conducting the meeting, but also the public input part of it, or something, I don't know, just.
Public involvement.
But generally, I guess that would read, there is some kind of protocol on policy decisions and projects that access and implements public participation. That's what that's saying.
I think Jim Plummer had a good point. I mean, you have to separate out things that you don't particularly want, aren't gonna, either don't raise to that level or just not appropriate. Yeah, lots of, all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that if you're gonna ask the public, do it fast, do it soon.
So everybody generally in favor of this either being its own resolution or part of one, but generally supporting the idea. Something that reviews the significance of projects and determines whether or not, or what level to involve the public, and then having a specific protocol for how to do that.
And the spirit of it being heavily reflected in the vision statement.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a
Ken?
I guess, we're almost half making recommendations now when you're sort of talking about things, and when you're talking about, notifying the public when we're going to sell property beside a hotel, and already you were talking sort of protocol and mission statement, and the mayor having a decision and having the opportunity to, there's sort of a disagreement. Well, the mayor, maybe should be able to do this in private rather than do it in public, and at what point do you do that? So this is kind of where the debate's going, but I think it's really clear that in order to preserve, democracy, you have to have rules that are enforceable, that the mayor can't choose to do something at one time because she feels good about it, and then not do it another time and say, I forgot, and then it's too late in the process. I mean, it's gotta be something where this is, enforceable, and as much as you elect people, you have rules, because really democracy isn't anything but rules, and it's rules because some people are going to violate those rules. So, you really have to have something in place where you say, this is what the mayor has to do, and this is what has to be done at this point. Otherwise, you don't have democracy.
The open meeting law has 2 or 3 different reasons it can be waived, a meeting can be closed. One of them is to talk about
It
litigation.
has
the city
actually
board.
9 exemptions.
Right, so, and one of them is real estate.
At least.
So city boards, if they are negotiating to buy or sell real estate, do not have to do that in open public session.
Wow.
And I think that's how it should be.
There also is a policy, and this came up in our inReach, that the city has for, isn't it?
Yeah.
For
Wayne
disposal.
Simon said that.
Yeah, we were given a copy of it, and apparently that it's not necessarily abided by all the time. It's a protocol, and it's not about public, but it's a series of steps and needs to be revisited, I think.
I just wanna check in, we're over our 30 minutes allotted for this, so how are people feeling? It's 8:35, how much energy do people wanna keep going? Do you wanna set an endpoint of, we wanna be out of here by 9:15?
9 sounds good.
9?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we got at least 10 minutes of my stuff to do.
Yep. Okay, so we've got.
And then we gotta divvy up who's gonna write the language
Yeah.
for these things.
So we've got about 11 minutes to kind of get through as much as we can of this list. Okay? Yeah, let's keep going. All right, the next one, orientation training for all new city officials, include diversity training.
To me, that's a standard one. I don't see that.
8, whatever number that is.
Well, I was thinking waiting until we got the thumbs up before giving something a number.
Not under public education general?
No,
For
This
city
is more than
officials.
inReach.
yeah, more of a.
Everyone in favor? Okay, so that would be 8. Alright, next one, support NCTV coverage of municipal meetings, NCTV in general.
I think that goes under
That-
4.
That could go under 4, expand forms of city public communication.
I'm just gonna I'm not gonna write A's and B's, I'm just gonna write 4 again.
4, okay.
Yeah, we'll just call it that.
So all in favor of that general? Okay. Term limits, limiting multiple appointments, diversifying appointments. Was that all under charter review?
It could be, some of it be charter review and some of it would be, I think, rules and regulations and,
And some of it could just be a
Or review of the
recommendation.
appointment process.
Oh, yeah, the appointment
Yeah,
process.
yeah.
Or
Review of the
committee
appointment process.
What number is that?
So that
5.
is,
5, I'd do it on the
Fine.
appointment process, and if in fact it turns out to be a charter problem, then you turn it over to the charter.
Well, it's just if you're talking term limits for elected officials, it's the charter. If you're talking about term limits for appointed officials, it's the ordinance.
So why don't I
I
make,
didn't read it, I mean,
Wait.
some.
this goes to 5,
yeah,
this would be 9, and this would be 9 and 5, or should we vote first?
let's vote first. So everybody in support of looking into term limits, limiting multiple appointments, diversifying appointments, that general,
I'm in favor of some of those and not others.
okay.
I'm in favor of all those, under committees, under revising the appointment process for committees.
well, when we say term limits, we're talking about to consider term.
Yeah,
We're not talking about mandatory, I mean, we're not recommending term limits or with this vote, consider.
Well, I think people are also talking about separating
Yeah,
elected
right,
officials
right,
from
yeah,
appointed,
right.
appointed committee board members. And that's why I was suggesting that we, say 5 and 9, or turn one of them down, or both of them down, but,
Bob, you said you had a problem with.
I don't like term limits.
The term limit specifically for elected officials or
Either
just
one,
in
either
general?
one.
I don't like term limits for elected officials. I'm fine with it for appointed officials or.
I feel the same way.
I used to feel that way, I no longer feel that way. I feel very strongly. And my head has been completely turned around after a long time, very strongly feeling not just about public officials, but about, all positions people. So I understand the ballot box is the way to check.
So maybe with this one, at this point, rather than getting deep into detail, we just say that, we're divided among, about the term limits part of it. But besides the term limits, do people feel good about recommending looking into, what was the second part? Limiting multiple appointments and diversifying appointments?
And what do you mean by do you mean, I'm not sure.
Holding multiple positions at the same
Okay.
time, or being appointed from one committee to another successively. I mean, this was mine, and this is not only mine, but, I got this from other people as well, outreach.
Okay.
But it seems like everybody's in favor of, besides the term limits, the other,
I'm
This is the
still not
point,
on
this is the
board.
point, to allow, to bring in and allow
Diversity
people
is a very
opportunities.
worthy goal.
And a diversity isn't just about gender and ethnicity, it's about a whole different person, new people versus people who've been on boards, like yourself. Welcoming in new people who wanna sign up and do
When this was
new
first,
faces.
when this idea was first presented to the council, I mean, one of the key members moving this forward was Mary Casper. And that was, she had done some research
Right.
on
Number of
some of
women,
the
all.
major boards and did it the composition, male, female, for example. But she also listed the number of people who had been on there for over 10 years or something like that. So I think that's what it's getting for, and it really goes back to our initial charter.
So it's actually multiple things on that one line.
Well, can't we agree that we're in favor of it for committees? For the committee
No.
review? Just looking at it for
I'm
committee
not.
review.
I'm
Fine,
not, no.
okay.
is anybody else opposed to looking at that? in terms of the committees? Okay, so we have one person not in favor of that. I say that now, we just kind of note that, and then I
Okay.
think we can figure out how we
Fine.
want to proceed with that as we go on.
And I think, that's something you probably want for public comment too, just to say, this is, we're not, a lot of us aren't in favor of that. What do you think, to allow the public to bring their arguments to that?
Okay. So the next one would be creating a charter review committee.
Wait, we didn't, no, we finished this.
Okay.
We didn't talk about elected. You wanna take that off the table?
Well, if
Put it
we,
under charter.
I mean, a total charter review is, the charter review is gonna look at everything.
everything,
Yeah.
so that would be a subset. And again, it's just a recommendation, it's not something that we're going on record as supporting. Just to consider.
Does that finish up that recommendation? By bouncing it over to look at the charter?
For all those related to elected
Uh-huh.
offices, yes.
Okay.
But there's two separate issues. One is limiting multiple appointments and the other is term limits on one appointment. And
You're saying not just for elected officials, or?
So like
This
you
is
can only
holding
serve on the
multiple
planning
places,
board
yeah.
for
Right.
4 years or something, or 6
Yeah, or
years.
2 terms.
Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of looking deeper into the whole appointments.
Well, it could also come up when we look into ordinances and rules, because they cover all the communities as well.
They cover all the committees,
Mhm.
all the planning, all the mayoral appointments to all of the.
Yep. All of the ordinances.
Well, the question is whether we're leaving it up here at all, even when we have any language.
I think we should leave it up and flesh it out the next.
I wouldn't want it to be the only thing under charter review, because I wouldn't want to give the
Right,
impression
that
that,
that's the reason
that's the
for it.
thrust of it, 'cause
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
believe that is the thrust.
Yeah.
Well, I
for
think
what-
right now, we're just moving items
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think a number of different things came up in discussion, so,
Should I put divided here?
yeah.
Okay, so then the next one would be creating a charter review committee. Is there, okay, everyone in favor of that one?
I just want to understand, because there's a formal process in the state for triggering a charter review, is that what we're talking about, or
I
we're
think-
just talking about a more
I
informal?
think before you have a charter commission, you
Yeah.
have a charter review, which is
Got
a
it.
more informal thing.
Okay, I thought we were
Right.
recommending a commission, like a full-fledged.
No, we did
The informal first step review,
right.
and then you have to go out and do that formal process of going.
And I like the way Michael worded it in his, which was, there's been piecemeal changes over the last,
Right.
like so let's go back and look at
Mhm.
what that means, all those collective changes, so.
And my only
Oh, it was
concern,
your wording.
No, we both had the same.
I thought I was saying that.
and my only concern here is, we got a whole bunch of recommendations, they're gonna take some relatively determined action by the city council. And this is as big as any of them, so I think I'm not in favor of putting it in, because it just loads up the plate too full. If there continues to be a best practices committee, as we've recommended, they could certainly suggest to the city council in the future that a charter review be done. But I am not in favor, I'm not opposed to it, but I'm not in favor of putting that item in our list of recommendations.
I said earlier in the meeting that I felt that there might be things that we actually leave up here, but we put them under. if
For
there-
this, for the committee to look
Further review
at.
by successor committee.
Yeah.
That we can
That'd
take
be fine
another
with
look at things, so
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes
but
left.
we're surfacing stuff really, in some ways.
Just
while we're
quickly,
making-
there were specific things that, people thought were very important that that needed to be changed, and it just happened to be in the charter. Now, I think everyone who was concerned about it said, you don't have to review the whole charter, you can do some piecemeal things, but there are things that need to be addressed now. So instead of a whole charter review, you could just say, these are the things that people are concerned about, and would happen to require a charter review.
Okay, just to get a show of thumbs again for people that were in favor of the whole review committee. charter review committee, so everybody, Wendy, are you?
I'm happy to have it
Charter review
Let's keep
committee.
it
be
in
something
for
that
now.
could be recommended to our successors to think about. That's fine with me.
Or we simply say, these were issues that came up, this would necessitate a charter change.
But I mean, the council wouldn't typically, in a city or town, a select board wouldn't review its own charter, they appoint
Right,
a
it's what
review
happens,
committee
yeah.
of folks to do that. I mean, doesn't Amherst do it like every year practically, they're always reviewing their charter and trying to.
Well, that's a full-fledged, yeah, they,
Yeah.
right, then they vote whether, then you have to vote by.
But I mean, they've been trying to change their
So I
public
don't know.
government for a while and it keeps failing, so.
So we're divided on that one too.
Would we agree that the charter may need review and that our successor committee should examine this question?
I think that's what you said, right?
Yeah.
And I think a bunch of other people are saying we want this as a recommendation.
And I think we heard, or at least I heard from several public comments throughout, starting from our first forum and then additional comments about looking at some key pieces of that. So from my point of view, doing the broad charter review, it doesn't zero in one particular thing and kind of get hung up on that discussion. It's saying, recognizing the charter is kind of integrated. And, I think the proof of that is the fact that we've been changing it bits and pieces right along, playing catch up. That's not a good way to operate. We should step back and kind of take a broad picture. And so that's where it's coming from.
Okay. So we're gonna have to stop at this point. But I just wanna get clear on the last recommendation.
Well, can we have a category of like hold that we're may have to revisit? Because if we're requiring consensus, we don't have consensus. If we're doing
And also
this
there's
by-
Jim who could weigh on it. So we can hold that for the 19th. Okay, so we still have a good chunk of the list.
Well, we agreed, I think we all agree about city council rules should be looked at in light of our recommendations, what we've learned.
Including ordinances, right? Ordinances and council rules.
My only hesitation about the ordinances again is that's a huge project. And so we recommend the council look at themselves.
Mm-hmm.
If the process happens as we hope, then the city may well see fit to look at all the ordinances, but that's such a huge project. And if we keep recommending things that are really big mountains to climb, that'll be harder to get support from the city council, in my opinion.
We're recommending things that are short-term as well as long-term.
Then we need to
And
separate them out.
There may not be another group that's sort of like charged as we are with highlighting areas that could be improved. And I think we would be remiss if we, as a committee, did not comment on the possibility of examining ordinances and looking at the charter. I mean, the charter is key to how the government is formed. And the relationship, obviously, between the mayor and the city council. And a lot of people see that as one of the key issues in our city right now. So I can't, just for us to completely ignore it.
I agree.
I agree as well.
So I say at this point, we just pause, take a picture of this, if Adam can take a picture of it, so we can make sure that we see the last half of that, and at the 19th, continue with our list.
Could we quickly?
Go
just-
through quick,
We're very close.
Is there anything up there that nobody is there something in the
Or that
remaining
anybody
list
has a problem
that somebody has a
with?
problem with? I mean, cause it seems like,
We're nearly there.
Yeah, let's see if
Do
we can
people
get-
wanna just
and then
extend
we
it
can group.
Yes.
and
I
go
mean, I have a
through it?
babysitter that's probably wondering where the hell I am now. I'll have to make a phone call and let them know, but,
Michael?
I'm limited in how much more time I can spend. If we can quickly go through here and move things into subgroups, so let's do another
Should 10 minutes?
15 minutes.
15
And then we got my list of stuff to do.
Yep,
Can I
And
just,
then we still have more?
yes, then that would be
Yeah,
another
that's what we chose
25
not to do in the
minutes.
beginning.
this clearly goes with number one, it's meeting procedures.
Yeah.
Right.
One.
Okay.
Um,
Ethical standards, could that be with the resolution?
Sure.
Yeah.
Very simple.
which is number,
That's number 6. Planning department review,
That's a separate
okay, any other ones we can combine it? Better internal communication protocols, could we do that with expand forms of city public communication, could that, or is that standalone?
well, it does, I mean, it does impact decision-making, so it does fall under. The other thing I would say, Lisa, I didn't really feel like it was a social thing as much as it was really everyone being on the same page in a working environment. And, you know, we surfaced some of the frustrations people had in not feeling like they were being well communicated with and they had a role in a process. And that would be my only little thing, is to really focus less on, you know, the social, that it really is a good, it's a, you know, a working protocol kind of thing. So,
And I would go a step further in saying, sometimes it's the social aspect of it is problematic. If people get bits and pieces of information in a social context, that everybody should be getting it regardless of whether, you know, how they socialize. There should be a formalized way of communicating. So the dispersion of information is oftentimes important.
yeah, some people say, and someone wrote this, it's Adam, you know, that you, oh no, it was Jason, I believe, in this, and people who are city officials must check their email at least once a day. That's the kind of thing, protocol that I fell under that, you know, from outside officials.
So do we wanna make that its own recommendation?
I think, you're talking about public communication or government communication?
Versus
Internal.
internal communication.
I was just saying, could it be a subset of government
I
communications?
think it could. I don't know how important it is to stand alone by itself.
Because
Number 4.
I don't know, it could be its own, it doesn't matter, I'm just trying to win out.
I would,
Trying to go home.
yeah,
What did the babysitter say?
I got it.
tentatively, I would say,
Okay.
let's leave it by itself, and then when we revisit this, we may very well
Yeah.
see that it collapses. But right now, I think there's a point behind it that could get lost, but we'll.
I say that rather than trying to shove all this in the last 1 minute, that we really do stop and take a picture of it and do it on the 19th, because I think at this point, we're all just kind of rushing
Yeah.
to get through it and might not receive as much attention as it deserves.
I have a responsibility, did you check out all of that?
So, we'll take a picture, we'll sleep on it.
Can I sit down?
Thanks for writing, Wendy.
Thank you.
Now I'm,
Okay,
so
so
Bob,
Bob,
those pens.
You gotta go.
I have to go.
Gotta go.
Sorry.
Okay.
Folks.
And I'm
So I emailed the
sorry
thing out that we're gonna, Lisa and I are gonna use tomorrow to see the papers. Anybody have any problems with it?
Yeah.
The memo
Be
that,
at the next meeting.
Lisa, did you and I wrote about what we're gonna give the papers tomorrow? That's okay. And you're not at our next meeting, or you going away?
Yep,
When?
the 20th,
Oh,
December,
okay.
no, November.
But you'll be here for the next meeting,
Yep.
the 19th.
Okay. Anybody else gonna be away before the first of the year?
I
And
will-
you're,
I will get it.
and you're gone for a while, is that right?
I'll be back in January.
Yeah, okay.
As far as I know, I'm not at this
Okay.
time.
And so you guys, somebody else is gonna have to be on, who's gonna be on Bill Dwight, you and you? Yeah, Wendy and Alex are gonna be on Bill Dwight show, is that
Right, I'll
right?
let you
Yeah.
take the lead and set it
So
up.
somebody should set
Okay.
that up?
Michael, you were on Bill Dwight, weren't you, recently?
No, you
No,
did the
Bill.
podcast and then they put that, you were quoted on Chris Collins'
Okay.
Your Voice, did you do a little phone interview or something?
Yeah. I feel like I didn't get my chance to do
Well,
my
what's it-
stuff.
go
I
ahead,
mean,
do
David had to go, I mean.
Go ahead,
I'm
go
here.
ahead, go ahead.
He's just
Okay.
standing.
So, are we clear on what we're gonna do in the next month to get the word out? That's my general question.
But we did that last time.
I think we did, I'm just thinking we've made any progress, but,
The press release went out,
Right.
but that was just to get
Right.
comment, that wasn't about our.
right. So we have one more meeting and we're gonna have to figure everything out
I
at our
made
next
the
meeting.
announcement at the city council
Okay, right.
meeting and.
You're welcome
emphasize
to, I'm gonna say this and be nice, but you're welcome to give me an assignment in my
Okay.
absence at the next
Me too.
meeting.
In my absence as well.
But if you want me to do a press release after, for the next, whatever, you can make that an assignment
Okay.
for me, coming out of your next meeting.
So tomorrow Bob and I are talking to the newspapers.
Who's it?
Good job.
And,
What
We're
else?
gonna go on Bill Dwight
yeah, but not until we're done.
right after the fifth.
But you gotta set it up.
Yeah, we'll
Right.
set it up for the fifth or the sixth,
It's a Saturday.
December. Probably a Friday.
Yeah, I think I wrote it in my book.
What else?
That's it.
That's it? That only took 2 minutes.
People want me to send them the,
Are we gonna split these up, or are we gonna try and write them?
David's gone. I just feel like we didn't do what we had to do in the time we had. You wanna split them up, I'll open the computer up again.
Well, we have a week, and it seems like not to make any progress is
Yeah.
really.
I think we
Fine.
should divide them up.
Okay,
Maybe assign David a couple.
Yeah.
So we've got, how many are there? 9.
it's not, if I want to flush them out.
To just kind of flesh them out, some of the wording and,
I'll do the budget process.
okay?
I'll take a stab at the first one.
Okay.
so Michael's gonna write up the one about,
Actually, it's public participation. So it's one A, you know what
Yeah,
I mean?
I get the budget, I just, the
One A,
protocols
one
and public,
B.
and public.
It's kind of a lot of what Jim had in his recommendation, but different,
Right.
yeah.
Alex is gonna do the budget process?
Yes, and also do public education if you want.
Okay,
I'll do, number 4, forms of city public communication.
Alex is doing 3.
I'm willing to take a stab at 5 if you want me to do that.
Okay.
The appointment. Again, this is an overview. of
Lisa was
what-
doing number 4,
I'm
right?
doing 4. Charter review.
Who's doing 5? The appointment process, Michael?
Yes,
Do you wanna do charter review, Michael?
sure, I didn't know if that made it on the list, but I think it does.
Who's doing vision statement, mission statement?
What's to do?
Flush that one out. You
Didn't
pretty much done it
Didn't we add
already.
it into something? Yeah. I thought we wrapped it back into something.
Somebody just has to write down what they're proposing that we adopt as a
I
recommendation.
think that was a standalone with other things well.
All right, I'll do
Do you wanna do that?
I'll do it.
Okay, so what's left?
Read what's in there.
Where's my pen?
Sustainability.
Yeah, yeah.
The next one I have is the importance of early communication with citizens and stakeholders. We could draft David for that.
We can give David that, yeah.
Why don't,
And Jim maybe
how
too.
about, I'll do 6 and 7?
You'll do 6 and 7? Okay.
I better write down what they are.
But
Look at that.
Isn't,
I can do number 8, orientation training for all new city officials. So I'll do 4 and 8.
I don't have them by number. Tell me what it is you're gonna do,
That
Lisa?
one's, orientation training for all new city officials.
And we're gonna be able to access the photos to whatever falls through.
We'll send them out tonight.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna be doing, writing, and I will get this either directly to the committee or to David, and we'll bring it, the Cohen Ridge section for a draft for the next meeting, so I really want to kind of hold it at these 2 things and that. So we're not gonna go beyond.
Don't block the bathroom block.
Tonight.
So you're drafting
Did you get everything?
who's drafting the training language?
Lisa?
I am.
And what I would suggest is for those of us who are drafting something on what we've already talked about,
To look
if
at
we
that
can
list,
review
yeah.
these and these ones to pull in, it may be
Right.
appropriate is to do that.
Right,
Will they be readable?
okay, great, so it sounds like we've got all of the ones that we agreed on farmed out with people,
I'll draft the language for the continuing body.
okay?
Continue, is that separate than the CAC?
Oh, that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm doing 6 and 7.
Okay, I don't have them by
Get
number.
it, he doesn't have it.
C, 6 is the, CACBP is 7.
Okay.
All right, before we go, can we do a quick checkout? Michael, do you wanna start?
Yeah, I'm doing one, 1 and 5.
Okay,
That's my checkout.
Wendy,
I won't be here next meeting, good luck.
will you submit them on email?
I'm going to submit 6 and 7, up there, and I'm gonna also, draft the inReach part of our, it's the inReach part, and, inReach and outreach, David kind of pretty much would be part of the draft report.
Bob and I will talk to the newspapers tomorrow, and I'll do 4 and 8.
I'm gonna do 2 and 3, and I'm gonna set up a, doing with Phil White on right around the city council, either 5th or 6th.
Okay.
And I will confer with Bob on other things that will be done.
Are you gonna twist his thumbs?
What? Found reluctantly that.
And I'll get the minutes out, chop chop.
Great, thank you, appreciate that.
Great.
Like my pre-note.
I think we got a lot
Nice
done.
job, thank you. Good job with facilitating.
Thanks, Adam.
I am-
And I certainly expect you to